And it's time. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our December 3rd Londonderry Utilities Committee meeting. Please join me in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lynn, before we start, Kristen, is this being recorded?
The green lights are on, so
Is it?
I am
hope.
assuming so.
I did run into Drew before I
green
came
light
to
was-
talk to you, and he said he was getting it set up to record the meeting.
Yeah, again, these are not usually done live because
that's
the
okay.
school board, so he doesn't need to be here, but
As long as
the
those
green
green
lights
lights
and the
on?
door open, using my context clues on that one.
Thank you.
So,
Okay. Very good. So, Ann Fenn will not be with us tonight, so if we do have any official motions that we have to talk about and agree upon, I'm going to nominate Joy Muller I'm going to appoint Joy Muller to vote for him. And other than that, thank you all for coming. So, we're into winter. The topic of discussion tonight is going to be energy. But first of all, I'd like to get into public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak before we get into the energy topics? Seeing none, we'll move on. So up first on the agenda is Josh Elliott. Josh is the Director of Policy and Programs for the New Hampshire Department of Energy. Josh is here to talk to us about the 10-year energy strategy for the state. And I think of interest for the Energy Committee anyway will be to see what we can take away for the master plan that we're going to be putting together, the energy master plan for the upcoming town master plan update. So, Josh, thank you very much for coming and talking to us tonight.
Good evening, folks. Thank you very much for the invitation. As I was telling Lynn when I got here, I also serve on my town's River Advisory Committee, so I certainly appreciate all the time that you take to do all these things. I'm in the same role in my town for a slightly different function, but I know there's a lot of work and a lot of research that goes into that. So thank you again for the invitation. As Lynn mentioned, I'm Josh Elliott. I'm the Director of the Division of Policy and Programs with New Hampshire Department of Energy. Today we're going to be talking about the state energy strategy. So before, let's see, this is nifty. So this is a QR code. If you have your smartphone and actually want to pull up the state energy strategy, you can do that now. I'll leave it there for a minute. Anybody who wants to pull it up. It's about an 80-page document, so you don't need to follow along. It's just in case somebody wanted to grab it, because I can't really, you can't click on a link from here. But it is available on the Department of Energy website. So this is my usual disclaimer that I do before any presentation. The opinions here expressed are my own. Do not necessarily reflect the opinions and positions the Department of Energy has or will take on pending legislation in Public Utilities Commission dockets or any other venue. So with that, I'm going to put up our mission statement for the department. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but essentially we represent the public interest in a variety of forums, whether it's at the legislature commenting on pending legislation that might have an impact on energy policy, or within the confines of a Public Utilities Commission docket. So a little background of what we do as an agency. We're broken up into 4 divisions. We have our Division of Administration, which covers sort of all of our back office functions, our business office, our attorneys, things like folks like that, compliance staff. We have our Enforcement Division, which most people know them by the DigSafe program. For example, if you're doing any construction or any digging, or if there's any construction sites, you see all the lines marked on the ground where they're not supposed to dig or there might be buried utilities. They also do crossing licenses for state lands or water bodies. They also conduct audits of the regulated utilities just to make sure their books are on the up and up. We have a regulatory support division. Those are the technical staff who testify during Public Utility Commission docket proceedings. So they either do the research, they pull apart utility filings, basically trying to uncover where utilities may not have spent properly or may not have been the best use of ratepayer dollars for things, to make sure that the ratepayers of the state are getting what they pay for and they're not paying for gold-plated projects, for example. Last but certainly not least, we have the Policy and Programs Division, which I'm fortunate enough to run. We do a variety of things, literally everything from a consumer services group, where if somebody just wants to talk to a real live human being at the other end of the phone and they're having an issue with their utility, they can call us. We can act as an intermediary. So it's literally everything from somebody who's maybe has gotten a shutoff notice, trying to get on a payment plan with the utility, to questions about why they're trimming trees in their neighborhood, and literally everything in between. We also run a variety of assistance programs. The biggest is the fuel assistance program. We have about 30,000 households receiving assistance paying their winter heating bills. Those are all federal funds. We have a variety of other assistance programs. Alongside those, for weatherization and electric assistance program. We also have a variety of grant and rebates and competitive grant programs for renewable energy projects. So whether it's solar, whether it's biomass, whether it's sort of a more competitive project. We also have an LMI, or low moderate income community solar project program, that operates. We're also in charge of all the new federal funds that have come into the state. So the Inflation Reduction Act rebate programs, for example, which have been in the news a lot, and a variety of other smaller programs. We also have our Offshore Wind and Energy Innovation Office, and I think that just about covers everybody. Oh, and Solar for All from the US EPA. So with that, I'm going to talk about actually get into the state energy strategy itself. So what is it, right? What is this document that we've produced? And it is set out in statute of what we are supposed to cover. There's a list of things that we're supposed to address in this document. We're supposed to update it every 3 years. As is the great timing of this presentation, we're actually going to open our public comment for the next iteration of the state energy strategy in a couple of months here, early in the new year, to begin working on the next version of this document. But what this document is designed to do is designed to give a framework for policymakers about how they think about energy policy. So whether it's a proposal in front of them, a larger concept, something like that, to give them a lens and sort of context as to what exactly that they're looking at, and a way to evaluate those different sort of policy proposals that may be in front of them. We specifically designed it to be an accessible document. As you know, being on this committee, it is very easy to get very deep in the weeds on energy policy, especially on the electricity side of things, where things get very complicated very fast. So it's designed to be an accessible document where somebody who's maybe on a committee like this one, maybe they're a legislator who maybe just be newly elected and serving on one of those committees that has oversight over these issues, or they're just a member of the public who wants to know more. There's a big section in the back that has a bunch of data where it's collected from a variety of different areas, talking about everything from supply, demand, prices, things like that, and basically how everything sort of works to get to how when you flip the switch on the wall, that the light actually comes on, no matter what might be going on outside. Aside from your normal outages when you have a storm, but there also is there's something for everybody in this document, right? It's we have been very conscientious about putting footnoting everything. My background is in history, so everything is in Chicago style. So there's footnotes at the bottom of everything. Thank you for laughing at that. So if somebody wants to do a really deep dive on a particular subject, there are those resources to keep building out that information. But probably most importantly, this document is designed to be fuel neutral and technology neutral. So it's not picking winners or losers, not advocating for one particular technology type over the next one. So I'm going to go through the 10 goals that are laid out in the state energy strategy. Go through each one of them bit by bit. If you do have a question about, Josh, what the heck does that mean? What are you talking about specifically in that, what I'm talking about? Please just flag me and I'll stop and I'll answer the question. But if it's a more global question, if we just wait to the end, that way it doesn't throw things off. Now, I will say they're ordered 1 through 10. The order does not matter with the exception of number 1. Other than that, there is no preference in terms of the order. So don't read into, something that number 10 isn't necessarily the least important out of the 10, with the exception of number 1, which is to prioritize cost-effective energy policies throughout the state. So you can see on the screen there, the state as a whole, on average, per resident of the state, spends almost $5,500 a year on energy costs. So that is soup to nuts. So that's everything from electricity to transportation, so gas, diesel, to home heating. So whether it's oil, propane, natural gas, everything in between. Coal, believe it or not, some people in the state still use coal to heat their homes. But it's ranks in about the top quarter for the continental United States. So that's not, in most metrics you want to be in at least the top quarter, maybe top 10 energy prices. That's not somewhere where we want to be. Because there's a real knock-on effect of that, right? There's a direct impact on the commercial and industrial side of things. Londonderry, I know there's the big development that just went in by the airport, right? As businesses are making a decision where to locate or to expand, energy prices, especially if they're an energy-intensive company, that plays a big role in where they might site something or might site a new facility, which brings, of course, the jobs, the tax revenue that goes along with it. So that's an important consideration, right? You want to keep rates at the lowest level possible, not the lowest level possible. Obviously, you need to invest and do things like that, but to be cost effective in terms of what you're doing for those energy policies to make sure that you're sending those signals that, right, the state is open for business. We want your business to come here. We want you to expand here. We want you to relocate here.
How competitive are we on rates compared to national average? General.
In general, it's a lot of it is set at a regional level. There are some variations. That's where state policy really comes into effect. We are at the disadvantage that we're at the end of the natural gas pipeline. So there's plenty of fracked gas if you even just go as far west as Pennsylvania, the Midwest. In terms of access to natural gas, we have constraints in basically in natural gas getting into the region. And that is what drove, so the huge spike in prices after the Russian invasion of Ukraine a couple of years ago, of where all of a sudden prices went absolutely bonkers. Default service or the energy portion of your Eversource bill was, 22, 24 cents, things like that. That is more of a function of the limited natural gas supplies, because the only backstop was literally bringing a tanker into Boston to offload liquefied natural gas. So from a bigger standpoint, that's sort of the underpinning of where prices are dictated. So if you're a business, right, if you're looking in some of the southern states, right, there's a variety of other reasons why you might look there. Energy prices tend to be a little bit lower. Yes.
Yeah, but we import natural gas from Massachusetts in particular into the state, and most of the electricity in New Hampshire, other than Seabrook, is made with natural gas. And then we export it back out of the state, primarily to Massachusetts on the grid. I'm trying to figure how that makes sense.
Because it is a free market and we are a regional grid, right? Prices go to wherever the highest demand is, right? So we can't just sort of clip the lines and say, okay, we're keeping all the electricity in New Hampshire, right? Those are private businesses that have the ability to sell wherever they want to sell their electricity to.
This is true.
So on the residential side, right, there is an impact on certainly on all of our wallets, right? As prices go up, we may make decisions about maybe what we set the thermostat in our home. For low-income folks, right, there's only so much they can do, right? We can sort of, most of us can sort of stomach it, maybe not willingly or not happily about it, but to pay those increased rates. But for low-income folks especially, right, the pie is only so big for them. And so there's a disproportionate impact on low-income customers. So, as I put in quotes there, the primary goal of this strategy is to pursue cost-effective energy policies, and that should be front of mind for whether it's a legislator, whether it's somebody on a town energy committee. There's only so much we can control in life, but that should be front of mind to make sure that prices are cost-effective, or that the policies that we are trying to implement are cost-effective.
Josh, is cost factor a term of art, or do you just mean in general, what's energy going to cost me?
It should be looked, that's a good question. So cost effective would be...
No, not cost effective.
I'm sorry.
Cost factor. In your second bullet there, you said cost factor for businesses?
Oh, in terms of, which I should say, I guess, cost is a factor for businesses and industrial customers as to where they relocate.
So just generic meaning of the word, not a term of art.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, it's just it is a part of what goes into their calculation versus they're looking at workforce, land prices, property taxes. That is an additional factor of what they look at.
Thank you. And Josh?
Yes.
When you say cost effective, what time frame are you talking about? Are you talking about 1 year, 10 years?
That's a good question because depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different answer for that, right? Cost effective in the sense of, right, the investment should be able to pay for itself. So in theory, right, if you have something that is going to be cost effective in terms of the policy itself, right, it should be in a sense able to stand on their own two legs, right? They're not necessarily dependent on subsidies or other sort of outside income, that they should be able to function on their own without additional support, in this case, ratepayer support, or sort of underpinning their business or maybe their policy that they want to impact. But we're going to talk a whole bunch more about that, and I know you have other folks to hear from tonight as well. So goal number 2, ensure a secure, reliable, and resilient energy system. Right, we all want the power to come on. We all want the electricity to be there when we flip the switch, when we turn on, the lights. Make sure our heating systems are working correctly, right? And you've probably heard a lot about and done a lot of research on the energy transition. So what exactly is that, right? There is this move from sort of a very centralized system, right? Perfect example, right? You have Granite Ridge up the road here, right? It used to be even 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was a very centralized system. You had a couple of, utilities who ran the poles and wires down your street. You had the bigger power generators, and then you had the individual customers, right? You don't have really a lot of players in that. You don't have a very complicated system, right? There's the utilities, they buy the electricity, they sell to you, end of story. With the proliferation of renewable energy technologies, pick whatever type you want. Solar is the most common one. Usually people don't install wind turbines at their house, although there's a couple of people who do that. But all of a sudden you've introduced all these extra players into the system, right? It's not just the utility talking to a handful of power generators. You have all of these other actors who are now part of the system, which complicates things, right? And it's both good and bad, right? You have people who are able to generate their own electricity at their homes or at their businesses. There's complications with that when that comes into the existing grid. Actually, I was just talking to your next speaker about that, of where you get all these goofy, metering arrangements that exist out in the state, of where, certain systems weren't designed to work this way, right? They weren't designed. It was designed as just this very static system, rather than having all of these other players in it. And you get between policy choices and then other just the fact that you have other actors in the space adds that additional layer of complication. Also adding complications with a lot of these renewable resources, they're intermittent and non-dispatchable. So the way that I like to talk about this is the perfect time of year. National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, right? Clark Griswold's trying to get string up all the lights at his house. And there's the one scene in the movie where he finally plugs them in. His wife flips the switch. They all go on, and the whole neighborhood goes out, right? You can see the whole scene as the whole neighborhood goes out. And there's all these alarms going on at the power plant, and some guy flips a big breaker, and all of a sudden, they kick on another reactor, and all the lights come back on, right? That is sort of the textbook definition of dispatchable generation, right? There's a big need that happens, there's a big demand on the grid, there's something you just flip a switch and it runs. Now, that's a gross oversimplification of how it actually works, but that's sort of a way to think about it. A lot of the other resources that are coming online right now, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, or some other the renewable types, those are the big two. They don't do that, right? It depends on when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. There are ways to get around that, with battery storage, but they're not necessarily on demand. You can't just turn them on and have them run whenever the demand is there. Cybersecurity, always a big issue. As the electrical grid is getting more and more complex, right? There's more telemetry within the system to be able to actually understand what's going on, and with all these additional meters that are going into the system. There are, of course, the cybersecurity threats as well that come along with that. People who are, either state actors or others who want to basically disrupt the operations, either for, for political gain, for if it's a state actor, or if it's just, your regular run-of-the-mill ransomware kind of attack where you just want to immobilize it and extract some money out of it. Physical security is also important too. There's been this very drive on cybersecurity, both at the federal level and the state level. And then there was an incident, I think it was about a year or two ago in North Carolina, where somebody literally shot at a substation and knocked out power for about 10,000 people for a length of time. And it was sort of a reminder to all of us who were all sort of focused on, okay, cybersecurity is like, right, physical security is an important thing too, right? You need to be able to actually protect some of these sites. Grid modernization sort of touched on a couple of these issues. Just as you are developing this new electrical grid and this new way of interacting with the customers, with generators, there's all the complexity that goes in with that. Workforce issues, this is something not a surprise to anybody who's in really any field in this state, right? There's a workforce issue. You name the industry or the field, there's a workforce issue. Same is exactly true for the energy sector, whether it's linemen going out and repairing the lines, to the technicians, to electricians, the whole gamut. Finally, resource adequacy, right? We want to make sure that there's enough generation operating on the grid, and I'm going to get a little bit more into this a little bit further. But you want to make sure that those power plants are there and available to actually turn on and run when the demand is there, so the lights don't go out. Goal number 3. Adopt an all-resource energy strategy and minimize government barriers to innovation. So this is what folks usually refer to as an all-of-the-above strategy, right? You want to have as many electrons on the system as possible. You want to have as many generators on as possible, because that means it's a simple supply and demand, right? You increase the supply, either demand is going to do whatever it's going to do, but as long as you keep increasing the supply, the price will go down or at least stay stable. The other part of this is government intervention, right? So this is we want to minimize the number of barriers to innovation, right? There might be some barriers that are put in place for consumer protection, right? You don't want to make sure people just aren't taken advantage of or aren't run over. But you also want to make sure that they're just not regulations just for the sake of regulating, right? They're just there just because, right? So you want to avoid that as much as possible, to allow the private sector to come in, to innovate, to flourish, to develop these new resources in such a way that you are going to get the lowest cost. There's also even when you are looking from a regulatory standpoint, right, you don't want the Wild West where you just have people just doing whatever they want to do and people end up getting run over financially because of it. But government policies, while doing any regulations that are necessary, shouldn't be doing unnecessary regulations on either the siting or the installation of these new facilities, right? The only way to drive down electricity costs is to add more generation. That is the way that you get there. You add more generation, you bring more online, you bring more competition, and having a free market for that will get you the most at the lowest price, generally speaking, over a time frame. But it's important to make sure that the policies aren't in place that inhibit that. So number 4, achieve cost-effective energy savings. So energy efficiency, this is one probably most familiar with New Hampshire SAVES programs. Basically, you're saving energy, right? You're doing things like as basic as making sure that your homes and businesses are insulated properly, right? You have the right, you're using the right materials. You have energy efficient appliances, right? If you have a big energy hog, you have an old freezer, right, that's 20 years old. If you get a new one, it's probably using half or even less that amount of electricity and still doing everything it needs to do. So you also want to make sure that this is cost effective, right? In this sense, for cost effective, you want the measure to be able to pay for itself over the life of the product. So for example, insulation has a life of, depending on the type, I'm just going to use 30 years as an example. So you want to make sure, okay, I'm paying more up front, but over a certain time period, right, I'm going to make my money back or at least be cost neutral. For every dollar that I'm spending, I'm getting $1 of savings out of it. So it's not just a matter of doing energy efficiency for the sake of doing it. Now, some people might want to do that, right, in their own private lives. Maybe they have either a personal goal or a sustainable energy concern or a carbon reduction goal of their own to minimize their own carbon footprint. So they may say, you know what, I want my home to be buttoned up to the highest extent possible, and I don't care what the cost is, right? And they're free to do that. But when you're using ratepayer dollars, you don't necessarily want to have that sort of blank check of do whatever it is, whatever you want, no matter the cost, because the ratepayers, all of us, through our electric rates, pay for those energy efficiency projects that are done through the New Hampshire Saves program. So you want to make sure that there's that balance there of, if the ratepayers are paying for it, that there's that cost effectiveness test that is put in place, which exists in the current structure. So goal number 5, environmental protection that is both cost effective and enables economic growth. So this is some things that people will say, we don't acknowledge climate change, this, that, and the other thing. Nope, it's right in there. Goal number 5, and I put it in quotes right there about the agency's view on climate change. It's a real escalating issue with significant impacts. However, that also does not mean to it's not sort of a carte blanche to commit economic suicide either, right? There's a balance there that needs to be attained. There's a way to do that, right? The most successful way that you can reduce carbon emissions is making sure that there is a market where low or no emissions energy sources are cost competitive with carbon emission resources. And the best way to do that is make sure that those resources are able to come in. Again, we talked about regulations. They're able to come in. They're able to participate. And the best way to ensure long-term viability is that they're able to do this without government mandate or without government subsidies. At the end of the day, and there's a big debate, and I don't want to get into it tonight, about, okay, what do you need to do for a subsidy in order to make some of these economically viable? And there's a variety of federal incentives and state policy incentives in other states and other regions to sort of get over that hump. But, right, at the end of the day, right, if you are constantly subsidizing something, right, eventually there's going to come to a point of the question's going to be asked of, okay, how long do we keep doing this? Is this viable in the long term to keep doing this and keep doing this no matter what the cost is, right? So the best way to reduce carbon emissions is to get the market to such a point that all of those resources can compete without needing those extra government subsidies, because then they're just going to proliferate, and the issue will be in terms of you'll get those carbon reductions. There's also a cost impact, right? This energy transition, there's a cost to it. And there's a way to do it, there are ways to do it that are very expensive, and there are other ways to do it that are less so expensive. But you have to be able to evaluate those costs and make sure that there's not undue economic harm that's done on the ratepayers, right? It would be very easy to say, okay, well, we're going to mandate 100% and we're just going to go straight forward and we need it done tomorrow, right? You could do that. I mean, not to some degree, right? You could do it in a very short amount of time, right? You could do a crash course on, solar and battery construction, for example, or a crash course on just building nuclear reactors everywhere, right? And there will be tremendous costs in doing all of those things. Not to say that it's not possible to do, but that to make sure that it's not causing unnecessary economic harm, and there's sort of a way to go about those. So goal 6 is sort of dovetails along with that, of that government intervention in energy markets should be limited, justifiable, and technology neutral. So this essentially comes down to the phrase of, not picking winners and losers, right? As a government, the most efficient way to get these new resources online, again, the free market of being able to get you both the most and for the least cost. Unfortunately, what ends up happening with a lot of these areas, right, you end up, those who are politically well connected or have specific business interests can then sort of curry favor with legislators, get their own deals in that end up, right, they make a bunch of money off of it, and all of us are sort of the ratepayers. We all pay like a little tiny bit, but, it's going to mean a lot for those particular companies. So you want to avoid that whenever possible. So, right, so whether it's if you want to incentivize renewable energy, right, don't pick, okay, I want this type of renewable energy versus this type. Just say you want renewable energy, right? You don't need to pick winners and losers within the technology types, because then, right, you get the most competitive. You get the lowest cost. Whoever is going to come in with the lowest cost is going to win. And you're going to get more of it, right? If everybody's competing against each other, there's going to be that drive to get a better and better product at a lower and lower cost. So goal number 7, encourage market selection of cost-effective energy resources. So this energy transition is also happening at the regional level. So we operate within what is called ISO New England. So it's the Independent System Operator of New England. I don't know if any of you have been on the tour of the facility. It's out in Holyoke, Mass. Absolutely fascinating. There's this huge, it's about 3 movie screens all put together where there's about 8 guys or folks at basically desks that each have about 16 monitors where they literally monitor the entire generation and flow and consumption of electricity over the entire 6-state region of New England. So ISO New England sort of plays that role of they're the market monitor, and they make sure basically the lights come on, that there's enough generation. They send the market signals to make sure that the power is flowing at a regional level. State policies, unfortunately, do impact that. So what there's this type of contract, if you will, that's called a purchase power agreement, or PPA. Now, some businesses or entities may do these on their own individual basis, which is fine, right? They may contract with an individual entity to procure power from a specific facility for a certain price for a certain duration, right? And those are perfectly fine. If there's a private business or if there's another entity that wants to sort of engage in those make sense. This is when you get to the state level, where the state is procuring or directing the utilities to procure power from a particular fuel source. Or a generation source, I should say, that ends up, it's sort of a counterintuitive argument or construct. I'm trying not to get too much into the regional issues here, but essentially, I'm going to use Massachusetts as an example, right? Massachusetts has said, I want to go out and procure or require that the utilities procure a certain amount of electricity from offshore wind, right? So they're going to purchase all of that electricity. They're going to mandate it. The utilities are basically just going to say, okay, we'll buy it, and whatever we have to pay for it, we're just going to pass right through to the ratepayers, right? It's not going to, they don't make any money or lose any money. They're just going to send it, whatever the cost is, straight through. And they have the legal protection to do that, right? The state has said, we must buy this. Okay, great, we're buying this. And then their regulators will say, yep, you followed the law. You can recover all of those dollars that you spent on that. When it comes into those purchase power agreements, you're removing segments of the load of the larger New England area. So you're sort of bifurcating that market. So the amount of energy that can be procured on a competitive basis is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And as you shrink that market, you get instability of where generators who, in a normal circumstance, might be running and might be economically viable to run, which then, by having this smaller and smaller segment, they're competing over a smaller and smaller amount of load, which means that some generators start dropping offline. So you will see early retirements for a lot of facilities that may or may not have been economically viable. Now, some retirements you're going to see just because they're no longer economically viable, right? That happens just as a matter of course, right? You have cheaper resources coming online. Older plants, older facilities are going to come offline just because of they can't make the numbers don't work anymore. But these purchase power agreements have the unintended effect of, by shrinking that market, you're going to inadvertently knock off other generators that might otherwise be economically viable, which ends up conversely increasing prices because of the with the regional issues, right? There's still, the ISO New England still has that mandate of making sure that the power flows when it needs to flow, that the generators are online, so you end up shrinking the amount of time that other generators can actually generate electricity and make money, but they're all still needed there as basically an insurance policy. So you get all these weird market distortions that end up happening. You also then run into a bunch of issues where then those market distortions, they've realized they're market distortions, and they try to implement additional market distortions to try to undistort the original market distortion. So yeah, it gets very complicated very quickly.
Could you put some numbers on that? Right now, what segment of the market is under power purchase agreements?
That is a good question. I will email Lynn tomorrow when I can pull up that number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can get you that number.
I mean, is it a big number, or a little number? Is it 5% or 50%?
It's an increasing number. So you see, like the three New England states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, procuring offshore wind, and they're procuring a large amount of that. Although that's still in flux right now, so that as those purchase power agreements either come online, but you're talking about, facilities that have a nameplate capacity of, 800 megawatts of generation. Just by way of comparison, Seabrook is 1,200 megawatts of generation. So you're talking big chunks of power come out of these agreements. But I can get you a number at least of what it is today, with knowing that there's more in the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is this a huge problem, or is this a problem on the horizon?
It's a problem on the horizon, but it's sort of like you're driving down the highway and you can see that the bridge up ahead might be a little bit shaky. You haven't gotten to the bridge yet, but you can tell there's something maybe is amiss down the road. That you can do something about it now, or you can go up to it and see what happens, kind of. So we're at that kind of phase of it. So it's not an imminent, the grid's going to collapse kind of question, but there are these increasing market distortions that keep, that lead to some of that instability. So number 8, generate in-state economic activity without reliance on permanent long-term subsidization of energy. So if there is a sort of a need, a desire to subsidize a particular form of energy, or a particular generation source, or a particular whatever, it should be limited and justifiable, and there should be a demonstrable impact, a positive impact for customers, right? So if you're saying, okay, we want to subsidize this one source, and it's going to cost the ratepayers X, if you are going to embark on that, you should at least try to figure out, okay, if it's going to cost X, is the benefit going to be at least X plus 1 or X plus whatever, something more than whatever the cost is. So this again comes into sort of those market distortions about whether or not you end up subsidizing and then permanently subsidizing a particular business, and then sort of the phrase, live by the subsidy, die by the subsidy, right? And you're not able to sort of function as a business. It's sort of the way to think about it is if you have a private business, whether it's say it's a construction company, right? If you're subsidized to do whatever you're doing, right, you're going to make certain decisions. But should your construction company be subsidized over somebody else's dry cleaning business, over somebody else's nursery or something like that? Because we're all paying for those costs. Goal number 9, support New Hampshire's interest in regional energy matters. So as I talked about sort of those regional markets at the New England level, right, we're basically interacting with our other 5 New England states, right? And as you may have noticed, New Hampshire is not quite like Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island when it comes to either energy, renewable goals, or tax policy, or a variety of other things. And that also sort of translates into the regional economic market as well. And we talked about sort of those market distortions that other state policies come into play. So I'm going to use offshore wind as another example. So right, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island want to procure a large amount of offshore wind off the south coast of Massachusetts, right? They originally had contracts. The contracts immediately folded once it looked like it might be good for the ratepayers. The companies went back out. They are renegotiating at the moment. There's a number that's going to come in for how much those are going to cost, but no one seems to know or will say what that number is, which does not give me good confidence that it is that it's a good number. So as part of offshore wind, usually it's pretty far off the shore. You can't see it from anywhere on shore for the most part, not exclusively, but you still have to connect it. So the developer might build all of those facilities out there, right? They might get a guaranteed rate for the next 20, 30 years from the ratepayers to generate electricity. They still need to plug those into the grid, right? They need to get into the transmission system in the state. So transmission lines, those are the big tall towers that you see if you've as I was driving in down here, Mammoth Road, about a mile that way, I think it's that way. There's the big corridor there. You can see all the lines. So those are all the transmission lines. Think of those as sort of the highway system for moving power around throughout the grid. in the region. Now, anytime there's a project done on one of those transmission lines, all the states in New England pitch in for it. So even if it's a project that's 100% within New Hampshire's load, as comparison to the rest of New England, is about 9%. So we consume about 9% of the total electricity consumed in New England. So anytime there's a project on that highway system, New Hampshire ratepayers are expected to pay 9% of those costs because there's a larger benefit to the entire grid of having a reliable system. Think of it the same way in New Hampshire, right? We all pay our motor vehicle fees and gas taxes and things like that, right? And it also paves Route 3 up at the Canadian border up in Pittsburgh. Even though I have never been on Route 3 in Pittsburgh near the Canadian border, I know my gas taxes that I pay, whether it's, I'm driving through here in Londonderry or if I'm at home in Goffstown or in Manchester somewhere, those will get paid for that road. Same concept works for this transmission system. Now, the catch is, okay, we've built out all of this offshore wind, only not as a market, it's not as a free market project, right? They didn't go out there as developers and say, we're going to build this and we're going to sell into the market for whatever price we can get. No, they only went out and built that because the state said, we will guarantee you a rate for the next 20 years or 30 years at this price. Will you go build this? And they said, sort of happens the other way around. They say, we want to buy this. How much will you pay? How much will it cost? And they said, okay, well, we can build all of this for X. Okay, great. We'll pay X for it for the next 20 years. And you still need to plug that into the system, right? And as you can imagine, running undersea cables from, dozens of miles offshore to then connect into the existing New England grid costs some money, and also upgrading wherever it's called an interconnection point, basically where you plug that into the rest of the grid. There might be upgrades that need to happen because of that further into the grid to make sure that that highway flows. Think of it at, you don't build the highway and have it stop at, a four-way intersection somewhere with single-lane roads, right? You have to then build out the other infrastructure around it. So all that comes at a cost. So our position, it's established in statute as well, so our legislators have weighed in on this, is great. Other states, you want to have these goals, you want to plug in these additional resources, and you want to do all this stuff. That's great. New Hampshire, we're not going to pay our 9% of cost of that, because under a normal project, you would pay the equivalent portion of, you would pay that prorated 9% if it was needed either for reliability or sort of upgrade or a merchant project. You would need to be able to, that would be a reasonable cost to expect to pay. But for a project that would only happen because another state's policy decisions that is not necessarily a policy decision that New Hampshire has made or may have been offered to the state, and the state expressly said, no, we don't want to do that. Our position is that New Hampshire ratepayers should not have to pay for those projects. Essentially, we do not want to subsidize the policy decisions made by other states. And we feel that that is not an unreasonable position to take. However, it does put us at odds with our regional neighbors, which is just how it works sometimes. So that being said, is sort of this goal is designed and intended to confirm and affirm that position, that we should continue to taking that position. So last, goal number 10, this is the thorny issue that gets around siting of infrastructure, right? It's everyone's in favor of infrastructure as long as they can't see it, right? It's always much easier if it's in somebody else's yard or somebody else's road to see these things. This goal is also not to say, oh, just build everything, just run over people. You can just do it, right? This is not what this goal is about. This goal is about establishing clear and defined objectives and goals and a process to ensure that, when a developer wants to come in to do a project, there's a clear and detailed process that also allows for those other stakeholders, right? If it's going through your neighborhood, you should have a say in how that project is done, or have a say in whether or not that project happens or not. But it's a careful balancing test, right? There are some projects that just need to be done in order to ensure the safe, reliable operation of the grid. And there's other projects that don't necessarily need that. So it's sort of that striking that very careful balance of making sure that all the voices are heard and considered in that process, while also not miring it down in decades of legal wrangling to get any basic sort of project done. So there's a careful balance there that needs to be done between those two. And there's no real easy answer to that. right? It's easy to say, okay, just don't build anything, then nobody's mad. But then again, you still need to, we live in a modern society. We need electricity. We need more generation, especially as this energy transition continues to take off. Right, you're going to need more transmission lines. There's going to be more generation that's built. There's going to be more of these things. More things are going to get built. In order for that to happen, right? That's just a fact of how it will work. So having very clear processes for both sides, both for the developer, so they have a very clear understanding of how this is all supposed to work, but for residents, they have a clear understanding of how this is going to work and how they can participate in those processes. So for the town level, which is really probably what you're thinking the most about, first and foremost, which I probably don't need to tell you this, is zoning, right? Do you want to encourage something or do you want to discourage it? And zoning ordinances are sort of that main crux, and when a lot of developers will initially look and say, okay, maybe we're looking at building something somewhere, what are the zoning policies, right? And this sort of comes in conveniently to the power of defaults. There was a professor at UChicago who wrote a book about literally the default choice, how important the default choice is in something. Won the Nobel Prize in Economics a couple of years ago, literally from everything of whether it's the default choice for a retirement contribution or what kind of fund it goes into, to literally to where they put products on the grocery store shelves, of where that default is. Because whatever the default is, right, you have to make an active choice to do something other than that, right, if you default into something. So that's comes in with zoning, right? Do you want to allow a particular type of development in a particular zone with exceptions? So maybe, okay, we'll allow everything up to, I'm making up numbers here, everything up to a 10 megawatt, solar array in a particular zone with some exceptions. Okay, there has to be certain setbacks, or you can't have it in certain types of parcels, or there has to be certain other restrictions around it. Or do you want blanket bans, right? And you say, absolutely none of this, but if you meet certain criteria, maybe you can get in somewhere. And that's sort of the thinking of the defaults of your zoning policy. In addition to that, you could have either the most attractive or the most hostile zoning. Hostile zoning will probably prevent anything from happening, but you could have the best, the most attractive zoning policy in the state. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to attract that type of development there, right? So existing infrastructure is absolutely critical for siting new facilities. So for conventional power plants, right, so we'll use Granite Ridge up the road here. They're right on top of a major natural gas pipeline, the Concord Lateral, which goes all the way up through Concord, roughly running around 93, right? Makes sense. They can, it's a natural gas-fired power plant. They tap right into that existing pipeline. There's no existing, there's not a lot of infrastructure they need to build to be able to get to it. Perfect. You've got your fuel source. And then you have transmission access, right? You have Scobie Pond, which is the biggest substation in the state here in town, right? You have that access. Basically, you can generate the electricity and you can get it out pretty easily, right? So those are the two things. So you get the fuel access and transmission access for conventional power plants. On the renewable side, right, two also key things, right? Transmission access, right? You have that here with Scobie Pond substation. But distribution access is also important. So I'm going to show a map if it'll come up. So that is much smaller than I thought it would be. But this is, you could probably tell, is your town. So I-93 is running along sort of the right side going down at an angle. You can see the airport in the top left-hand corner where all that green is. And that blue line is basically Mammoth Road 28 coming down to 128 with Mammoth Road all the way through. And then you can see Derry on the other side of the highway. So essentially that is where all of your three-phase power is within the town. So what is three-phase power? If you look out at the telephone line and you look at the very top, do you see one line or do you see three lines? If you see one line, you have what's called single phase. If you have three of them, there's three-phase. Three-phase power is absolutely critical to interconnecting anything of any decent size, because those three lines together, you can move a lot of electricity in and out. You can both get it into an area and you can get it out of an area. So this is what's called the hosting capacity map. So you can go and look at this on the Eversource website. You can drill down, you can look at individual neighborhoods. So anywhere where you see sort of light gray lines, that's single phase. So other than, maybe a residential array that's on the roof of your house, you're not going to build anything big there. Anywhere where you see orange, green, or blue, less so dark red, because that's so it's an indication of basically how much space are on those individual areas to add additional capacity. So if there's a solar developer looking at Londonderry, for example, and saying, hey, where can I install an array? Because interconnection costs are very expensive. Three-phase power is very expensive to run that to a new area. So they're going to look at a map like this and say, okay, where's there a parcel that's available where I can build? They're going to start with that. Well, they should start with that. And then they're going to look at a variety of other factors, including that. But those are the areas, those are going to be the easiest areas of where to develop solar arrays, for example, because that's the place where they know they have that transmission access, that access to the distribution system, and there's the capacity on those lines basically to absorb that electricity and then send it further out. Now, there may be other pieces of that, right? Of course, you have to control the parcel. It may not be zoned for that kind of development and things like that, but this is sort of a first cut of where somebody may look in terms of siting one of these facilities. Yes?
So when you say three-phase, it's easier. So example would be the Londonderry development on Exit 4.
Yes. Yep.
You basically just came down Pillsbury Road and just upgraded the services across the new bridge and then ran a whole system in there. Was that an upgrade of transformers, cable lines? Was it minor or major? So, just give an idea.
Yeah, so you can see actually it's sort of, I can't see it quite from here, but you can sort of tell where Woodmont Commons is going in too, right? You can tell where Exit 4A is going to go in as well, and you can see where there's sort of that knot of blue. I think it's 102 as it's cutting across. But they already had access there, right? They already had, and I don't know the specifics of how many transformers or substations that they had to upgrade, but at least they had it close by, right? They had the ability to move a lot of power into that area because there was that existing infrastructure that was already there. So that I don't want to say it played a major role in where they decided to put that.
So I'm
but
asking for specific reasons, so I'll follow up on
okay,
that. So, of course, they're not done with that, and they've just started announcing what they're gonna do to finish out the development at the Woodmont, the whole big plaza there. Then they're gonna start migrating north to where it's undeveloped in the apple orchards and the, it was conservation land, okay? Which is gonna be very interesting, and I live off of Spring Road, which happens to have one of those three-phase cables that droops through my almost backyard, only 10 feet off the ground, which is interesting, but they've got it wrapped. And I'm just wondering, if I want to see when that's going to happen, the plans and stuff of that, is there a web page I can go to, something like this that tells me, all right, they're going to develop this. I know they're already talking with the power distribution people, the cable company people, and, not much left the telephone people, but the rest of them, right? And I'd like to see what, is there a place I can click on to see, okay, that's happening here, that's gonna happen, because there's a lot of huge apartment complexes being built, which means, that's gonna be fed into, so. I just wanna know if there's a web page I can go to click on it and see what's happening.
that is a good question. So first with that, so to ask the first comment, is there a power line that's 10 feet off the ground going through your backyard?
They know about it, it's okay.
They know it? Okay, all right. I was going to say, we should probably talk about
It's on
that.
the
if
Class 6 road, and every time there's a storm, a tree goes down, and I gotta call them and remind them that, no, you didn't turn all the power back on. There's a whole section of Gordon Homes that still hasn't lit up yet. So they've gotten pretty good at it lately, but.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure.
Tighten it up, but when the ice gets on it, it droops pretty good.
Gotcha, because that's the kind of thing where I might call somebody on my way home to take care of it, to have somebody take a look at that, because that's kind of dangerous.
Well, just
Yeah.
go to Spring Road, you know where it is.
Yeah.
It droops way down. But it's gonna be gone. It's gonna be gone as soon as they decide what they're gonna put on that piece of the development.
So I think the developer themselves would probably be the best person to ask about that, because the utility will probably will build in, and they will, whatever the developer asks them to do. Now, right, they might get out there and realize, oh, holy cow, there's this issue here with this particular spot, and they have to go around it, or if they're undergrounding everything and run into ledge, they may decide not to underground it. So there's a variety of factors until they actually get out there what they're actually going to do. But I think the developer would probably have the best sense of
Really?
what that is going to look like. Yeah, because they will work directly with the utility in terms of what they like from the utility standpoint, right? They don't care, right? It's not their property, it's not their parcel. They'll work with the developer and they get paid by the developer to install all of that extra capacity there. But it'll be a matter of, okay, well, what does the developer want to pay for?
It's a little more complicated than that in the sense that this is a lot of old development work with new development work. So up Spring Road comes this cable, well, it used to be a big transformer, and that feeds 2 houses and another 40 houses to the right. To the left, it stops for a half a mile, and it's fed through a backfeed through Derry and Trolley Car Lane. So you get this big U that has 2 power sources. I know they're gonna figure out, we gotta fix this. We don't need 2 separate 3-phase powers feeding this one whole grid. So this will be interesting. Oh, there's no ledge there, don't worry about it.
Yeah, you'll find it.
Except the piece that's already shown on the ground.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. No, we had some work done in our backyard, and the minute they pulled it up, it was just all rocks underneath. It's just all rocks.
The reason why I ask is, we're trying to do a master plan in the town, and it'd be good to know if there's a place we can go to see, planned future development by the utilities, that's all.
What would we have to do to get a legend for this map? In other words, the colors obviously have some meaning, and it's probably expressed in kilowatts of unused capacity, or maybe not, I don't know, but it would be nice to have numbers that go with those colors.
Yeah, you know what? As I was putting it together, I thought, oh, I should probably put in the legend. And I thought, I don't need to worry about that. So I did need to worry about that. Yes, I can.
A lot of engineers in the room.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm trying to recall from I believe the green I think it's the blue is up to 10 megawatts. So that's the size that you'd be able to connect some facility up to 10 megawatts or a series that equal up to 10 megawatts along the different phases. I know red is the lowest one. I can send Lynn when I get back into the office tomorrow morning the link so you can actually go to this map, plug in Londonderry, and you can literally look at every single street and see where all the
And what is the source of this?
So it's Eversource. So these are called hosting capacity maps. So essentially they show, they're designed to give a tool to the developers to basically do that initial pass. I know others can speak to it far better than I can, but essentially a lot of developers would get very far along in a project, spend a couple $100,000 and then go talk to the utility and then find out, oh yeah, it's going to be $5 million to actually connect you in after they've spent, a whole bunch of money. That's, a lot of people get frustrated very easily when you're talking those kinds of dollars. So this is was actually directed by the legislature for them to do this. So all the utilities have one, so you can go up, whether it's, here in Londonderry or somewhere else in the state, that there's these maps so you can figure out exactly how much capacity. Now, it's sort of an initial cut. If you're actually doing a project, you probably want to contact the utility and figure out, okay, so this is up to date. Did some other project come in and that this line is actually, there's no capacity left, which does happen. So it's sort of an initial blush for the purposes of this committee. This is a good
And it
resource.
works off the GIS systems and all that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, got it.
So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I know that was a lot of information, and I probably ran over my time. I should have kept a timer with me here, but
Looks like it's going back to the 3-phase power map.
Yeah.
Does the state or your office try to influence anybody into expanding the availability of 3-phase power, or do you just let the market work its magic?
so usually the traditional way that utility regulation is done is that the last person, the one who causes the need for the upgrade, has to pay for the upgrade. So and there's a variety of debate as whether or not that should be the way to do things, but I'm going to leave that debate aside. But traditionally, usually it's, say, Woodmont Commons, for example, right? If they weren't going to build that whole complex there, that whole development in, right, there would be no reason to run 3-phase power through through those apple orchards, right? There'd be no reason for that. So that's traditionally how it's done. So for example, if there's a bigger business coming in, they may say, okay, we've got all this land. Okay, yeah, we'll just pay for the utility to run this extra 3-phase power out to us. perfect example is ski areas, right? Obviously not around here. Well, there's one in Manchester, but I guess they count. But if you think of your big ski areas up north, so it's Loon, Wildcat, Attitash, they all have three-phase power, even though they're out in the middle of nowhere, because the demand is so much for snowmaking. Is a very energy-intensive process. So they all have three-phase power, even though it's they're out in the middle of nowhere. They would have no reason to have that kind of amount of power moving through it. But the ski areas all paid for that, at some point, not anytime recently, because it's been there for a while. But that's a good example of where the last person in ends up paying for it.
Recently, National Grid proposed a power line from Canada with terminals ending in Londonderry. What happened to that?
Yeah, there was a couple of those. I think the most recent was the Twin State Connect. Yes, so National Grid had gone through the process. They had actually gotten an award from the U.S. Department of Energy. Once they found out about all the terms and conditions that would come along with federal money to do that line, they worked with a number of other states to sort of buy capacity on that line. The way that it was done was sort of the U.S. Department of Energy would take up to about 50% of the capacity of that line, and then they had to find the other 50% to make it viable. I know they were working with a number of states to try to get that, to buy in capacity to that in order to get that other 50%. The project ended up falling apart. Before that, they had even gotten any commitments from any other states because they looked at the terms and conditions, I should say. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm reading between the lines and dealing with federal funds on a daily basis. I can make certain assumptions. Seeing the terms and conditions that came along with taking federal money, pretty stringent. Davis-Bacon, so prevailing wages, Buy America, Build America. There's a number of other things that go along with it, which aren't, being in the Northeast, Davis-Bacon, usually you're fine with, where we pay people up here is usually enough. It's the reporting that comes along with it, which is an absolute bear, as we're literally going through at the moment at the state level for a lot of the projects. So they, and I understand there was a change in corporate leadership at National Grid, and the new folks who came in took a look at it and said, nah, we're not doing this. And they ended up pulling out, and I think it was they got about $500 million. Was it I think it was about a $500 billion guarantee from the federal government, and they decided to not take them up on it.
It seems like there's a huge latitude in the term cost effectiveness. So, this plan could be a great plan or not so great, depending on the details of how you determine cost effectiveness. For example, I assume that you use either a cash flow analysis or a present value analysis when you're determining cost effectiveness.
So we don't actually determine cost effectiveness ourselves. So we don't have sort of a model or a method that we say, okay, you must use this in turn to determine whether a particular project or a particular policy is cost effective. We'll look at it from purely a policy standpoint, right? If there's a particular policy before the legislature, we can say, okay, go to the legislature and say, okay, based on our rough estimate of what the cost would be, we know what the cost is going to be. There will be some benefit, right? There's always a benefit, but it's a matter of does the benefit outweigh any of the cost that's involved, right? That you could say, okay, we want to encourage the development of, I'm going to pick on solar. We want to encourage the development of solar arrays in the state. Okay, we are going to mandate that all the electric utilities buy, which is how the renewable portfolio standard works. We are going to mandate all the utilities buy a certain percentage of their electricity from solar resources, right? And you can say, okay, well, if you want, what's the policy goal here, right? Do you want to have more solar development in the state? Do you want to have more carbon-free generation in the state? Do you want to just have more generation in the state? So it sort of goes into that deeper question of, okay, what is the actual policy objective here, and whether or not that actually is cost effective in terms of, will it pay for itself? Is there a net benefit to the ratepayers for it that is just sort of beyond that's beyond, that one individual entity or those entities that may benefit from somebody being required to buy their product.
That's exactly why I'm asking about how you use present value analysis. So if you're talking about this solar example, do you go out 40 years? Do you go out 20 years? Because it makes a huge difference in the calculation. And what are you using, for a discount rate? How do you come up with that? Who comes up with that? Those details make all the difference in the world in, your number one goal there of having cost-effective policies. But the plan, at least the little bit you've shown us, doesn't seem to provide any help with that.
Right. And so that's a good question, right? In determining this usually comes up within the context of those Public Utilities Commission dockets, and there's a lot of money that is spent on lawyers and technical analysis to go into all of those sort of details of, okay, so energy efficiency, right, is sort of an easy one to calculate, at least, well, to some degrees, right? You can say, okay, if we are going to install this additional insulation in this home, right, we can say this is what the cost of the insulation is going to be for this home. That is a known value, right? There's the discount rate. What is the cost of money today in order to actually do all of that work? And then you have to forecast a number of things, right? What is the cost of electricity going to be? What are the costs of those products going to be? What is the lifetime of that improvement, right? How long will that whatever that thing is that you're buying last? And that sort of dictates how long that those costs go, or I should say, that dictates in terms of what time of a horizon, right? You don't go beyond the horizon of the useful life of the product to figure it out. So it's a little bit tricky when you're dealing with a policy, right? You're not dealing with something concrete. You're not saying this particular instance of this particular situation, right? Installing insulation in this home, right? It's very quantifiable. You know exactly what it is. You know the value of it. And of course, there will be people who argue till the cows come home and exactly what the discount rate is. What should you be using for that number? What's the most reasonable assumption? To go into that, and that's sort of the field of economics, which I'll leave to the economists. But when it comes to a policy consideration, right, it's a little bit difficult because you're not dealing with a specific project in and of itself. You're dealing with a policy that says, okay, I want to encourage or discourage this particular type of generation, or I want to encourage this particular policy point. Right, and there are ways to project costs, right? The easiest, or I guess the most efficient way would be to say, okay, is this going to cost more than if you were just to buy it out in the open market, right? And you can say, okay, that at least that way you can say, okay, we know the market is going to offer it at this price. If we do this, it's going to be that much above whatever the market price would be. Now you have to make a bunch of assumptions, right, about what the market price is going to be for electricity. You can use historical averages going backwards. You can use try to do forward projections. You can just peg something to an inflation rate. So there's a variety of ways of doing things, and there's a variety of ways that they, depending on who you're talking to, that will, either shorten that window or widen that window, or lengthen that window, I should say. I wish there was here's the mathematical formula. This is how you determine it. I wish I could give you that answer because that would make my job much easier.
So, do you mind if I have one more follow-up question?
Go for it.
Do you consider, or do you allow the use at the PUC of the social cost of carbon?
That is a good question. The answer is yes, but no, but no, but yes. So the legislature, right, that's a good bureaucrat answer, right? So long story short, the legislature has sort of rejected doing any sort of adding a value to carbon, right? They have not said we want to be net zero by a certain date. So or we need to have a certain percentage of our electrical generation completely renewable by a date certain. We do have something called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is 22 point, I want to say it's 5 or 3% of over a couple of different resources be generated by renewable energy. So there's that component of that where you can say, okay, what is the cost of the renewable energy certificate to be able to claim the value of the renewable attributes of certain generation. The other is what's called RGGI, or it's a Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or where there's where there are allowances, and there's an auction that happens quarterly where there is a price that is set on those allowances, and there's a market trading for basically for generation. So to the extent that that is sort of baked in, those are really the only two that are where the legislature has given clear policy direction and authority to engage in those types of things. So in terms of a social cost of carbon, it's basically a combination of those two things that is the limit of what's included or considered.
Yeah, I mean, just one person's opinion here, but I think leaving that out of the strategy, or at least having the strategy explain your approach to how you will use the social cost of carbon, or why you will ignore it, that should be in the strategy. I'm sure you're going to get this in spades at the public hearings, but at least I've confirmed what you're doing and what you're not doing. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, as a state agency, the legislature is our board of directors, right? If they have said, we want you to consider this, we will consider it. If they've said, we don't want you to consider this, and have expressly rejected us considering that multiple times, as an unelected state official, it's very hard for me to say, nah, they got that wrong, I want to do that anyway.
Yeah.
But point taken. I understand the other side of the coin, but as a state bureaucrat, I can't just say, those 424 people got it wrong, I'm going to do something different.
Well, there's one that probably would get it right.
Could you please?
So I guess I'll ask maybe the last question, I don't know, but how can we as a community, how can we as Utilities Committee help influence energy policy in the state of New Hampshire?
Sure. So it's funny, I was actually talking to a couple of my colleagues, and we were trying to figure out, I need to actually go back and look. Londonderry is very fortunate that you have both the Senate President and the presumptive Speaker of the House, both from your community. As a history major, both of my degrees are actually in history. I was trying to figure out the last... Oh, are you? Okay.
Eventual Speaker of the House.
Okay.
Eventual governor.
Eventual governor.
They keep promoting you.
I guess.
Trying to figure out when the last time that's happened in New Hampshire history. So you've got a lot of, just here in your town, there's a lot of authority there. The easiest way would be, talking to your legislators about, things that you consider important or want to be considered as policy decisions, maybe when votes are coming up on certain bills. The other would be, as we are embarking, and Lynn, I'll make sure you get the when we have it go live, we are starting the process of updating the state's 10-year energy strategy. There we go. So there's a public comment period, which we'll be taking public comments, both written. We haven't figured out exactly how we want to do the other portion of it, but there will be a generic email address where all of the comments will be taken in. They'll be reviewed. I can guarantee you I will read them. Don't worry. They're not just going into nowhere. So that's also a way to help influence policy.
Great. Anything else?
Yes, I did have a question. You mentioned about offshore wind, like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut are into that. Is any of that produced now offshore that is coming onto the grid in those states?
There are two. There's a small facility off the coast of Block Island that's generating 6 turbines, I think, and there's one that's off the coast, further out to sea, off of I think it's in Martha's Vineyard. I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. That is just starting to come online. They've built a number of the turbines. I don't know if they've built all of them. You may have seen in the news one of the turbine blades fell off and landed in the ocean, and they've been trying to figure out how to pull it back up, and there's been some issues around that.
But when we're talking about offshore wind, we're talking about like 10 miles out.
Oh, yeah, even more than
So
that, yeah.
if it's on an island, Block Island, Martha's Vineyard, whatever, personally, I don't consider that offshore wind. I mean, that's like having a windmill here in a mountain in New Hampshire.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's off the coast of those places, so it's not on those islands. It's in the water off the
It's
coast.
in the water.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, all right. But when we're talking about future offshore wind, we're talking about huge ones out in the Gulf of Maine.
Yes.
Or whatever. And they're probably going to be 10 miles out. In other words, beyond in international waters.
Not in international waters.
State waters, in federal waters.
Yeah, they'll be in federal. So it's the exclusive economic zone of the United States. So they're 100% federal waters. State waters only go to 3 miles out, and after that, it's federal waters.
Well, how far?
It's out to the extent of the exclusive economic zone, which is a combination. I think it's 200 nautical miles, and then there's something to deal with the continental shelf of where it drops off.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's far out. Yeah, when they build these things, you will not be able to see them from.
Well,
Even if you're on the Isle of Shoals, you will not be able to see any of these.
Right. My concern is this, that if they're in international waters, which you're saying that's not the case,
They will not be in international waters. No.
okay? And who are going to be the investors that build this? I mean, are they going to be American companies, or are they going to be international companies?
All of the above.
Well,
Yeah.
and so then, then who's in control of that? You see what I mean? The federal government is in control of that? The state is in control of that?
So the way that it works, there are lease areas. So similar to offshore drilling. Excuse me. There are specific lease areas, and then they sort of go out and figure out where exactly those lease areas are through a variety of processes. But the lease areas, there was an auction actually at the end of October for 8 lease areas out in the Gulf of Maine, 4 of which sold. The other 4 did not sell. So those are sold to private entities by the federal government for the development rights to actually put in offshore wind. A developer would only develop those probably if they entered into a purchase power agreement with some large entity to buy that electricity at a fixed price over a time frame. So there's still a couple of steps. Whoever those companies are, right? They might have U.S. subsidiaries that do those things. I should know what the name of the 2 companies are, and they're escaping me at the moment. But
Yeah, but it's just like the oil companies, okay, that getting leases offshore. Some of those oil companies might be from Great Britain, France, wherever, okay? And by the same token, my concern would be with this offshore wind. I mean, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments.
yes.
Okay? And so, I mean, Eversource or anybody, a small utility company is not going to be building these.
So New Hampshire, actually most of the states in New England other than Vermont are no longer vertically integrated. So Eversource does not own their own generation.
Well, we're aware of that, yes.
Okay.
So, can I contribute a little bit? So a lot of times in these, not necessarily in these specific transactions, in power, there's a thing called an independent power producer, and they will raise money from different investor types. So if someone was going to invest in a power plant that had a 20-year offtake, a lot of times that'll be, like, insurance companies love those types of transactions because they'll give you, $100 million, and then you get 8 or 10 or 12% return on that, consistent over decades. Your question about is it international funding? There is a big project will very likely have that level of funding, but insurance companies invest in it, banks invest in it, pensions invest in it. Anybody that has a need for long-term stable cash flows over a long, long period of time.
Investors,
Yeah, investors.
big investors,
Yeah, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs,
BlackRock.
BlackRock. Yeah, somebody that can write the $1 billion or the
Yeah.
$100 million check.
Right. Okay, well, I think it's of concern, when we're looking at the big picture, where the power's coming from. We're all for clean power. We're for solar power. We're for wind power. I mean, it's all part of where it's coming from. I really like hydropower. Can you tell us anything about hydropower in New Hampshire?
Can you be slightly more specific than that?
Who owns it?
There are a variety of private companies that own them, depending on the size of the dam. There's a Vermont company that owns, it's a Canadian company that I think owns a couple of the ones on the Connecticut River, but most of them are actually just small businesses, especially the very small ones.
Well, some of them, well, for instance, in Lawrence, the dam at Lawrence, I think it's been sold, but it was run by an Italian company. We have nothing against the Italians, but
Ray, I might say it's just the market's driving it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so.
Absolutely.
So what's your question?
whether we have any control over some of these things.
In terms of who invests in them, I would say we
Well,
don't. In terms of
What the cost is,
regulatory.
what the cost is ultimately going to be.
Yeah, not at our level.
No.
No,
Thank you.
they're private companies.
Yep, private companies. Well, on behalf of the committee, Josh, thank you very much. I really
welcome.
do appreciate you coming and talk to us. I think this has been very enlightening. And I think the more we digest the presentation and the information you provided, I think we'll be coming at you and your organization with some more questions.
Happy to do it. That's what we're here for.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You realize it was that late? Hopefully I left some time for Bart.
Feel free to stay, feel free to leave. I know it's been a long day for you, I'm sure.
Sick wife, so.
So next up on the agenda is a discussion on our community power aggregation program. We have neither Stuart nor Kristen here with us tonight.
Yeah,
but we have
sorry,
Bart
you got saddled with me tonight, but good to see all of you. Stuart, unfortunately, had an emergency in the family. His mother's in the hospital, so I am his late fill-in here. But hopefully, I'll do an adequate job of giving you a picture of where the markets are and what we can expect going forward. Now we got our approval from the New Hampshire PUC in August. And I think August 27th. And so since that time, we've effectively been street legal in the state of New Hampshire for our community choice aggregation program. But the one thing I've been waiting for to find out is where are the Eversource rates going to go? And we hope to learn that information on December 12th. So just coming up in 9 short days from now. So we did get some indicative pricing that we forwarded along to Lynn, I think, last week or the week before. Prices are looking pretty competitive. I don't know if you had a chance to see that.
I don't recall seeing pricing
Okay.
information.
I can forward you the email again after the discussion.
Yeah, please do.
And circulate it to the committee. But we're looking at a time frame that would effectively have us launch for a March 2025 start date. And the reason for that is, while prices are looking somewhat good right now, for the short term, we're all the way down into the 8.5 cent range for an 8-month opportunity for March start. The midterm would be about 20 months that we're looking at. Those rates are right around mid nines, like the 9.5, 9.6. And then for longer terms, upwards of 28 to 30 months, we're in the shallow 10-cent range.
And those would be the
so-
rates for the program, or those are the rates you're expecting?
Those are the rates that we have right now from the
Okay.
suppliers that we get bids back for.
Okay.
And so, in a normal marketplace, I would tell you that maybe we should act soon on one of these opportunities, potentially either the short term or the midterm opportunity. The reason for some hesitation before we know exactly where Eversource is going to be is because last year, at this same time, I was presenting to my friends in Francistown, and they asked me where I thought the Eversource rate was going to go. And all of the evidence I had from the market charts was telling me it was going to be somewhere in the 10 to 11 cent arena. One thing I did not factor in was there was a significant overcollection in the previous cycle, and the Eversource rate came out at 8.7 cents per kilowatt hour, far lower than it would have been without that repayment of the overcollection. So in an effort to avoid any scenarios like that, and some of you may have read in the newspaper about how the Office of Consumer Advocate filed a complaint against the towns of Ringe, Jaffrey, and I think one other, because they had launched their program under rates that at the time were above their CCA rate, but by the time the 8.7 rate came to pass, their program had just started, and so they were upside down. So we want to avoid that at all costs. And so on the 12th, we'll have that information, and we'll be able to give you, with clarity, our recommendation on what to do. But if there is no significant overcollection, we think right now there's a market opportunity that will have us with some good savings coming up, certainly for the first part of the rate cycle, and we also are confident that we're going to have thinner savings, but savings still on the back end on the second part of that cycle if we go with a 20-month opportunity. So, but again, remains to be seen on that front. Now, again, why March? So, we do still have to do the mailings to the residents of Londonderry. So when the town manager or his or her designee signs off on our first power contract, we have an obligation per the state statute to give our residents 30 days notice via a mailing. And after that mailing has been issued, we also have an obligation to have a public hearing, a public gathering in which we answer questions from your residents here in Londonderry about the program, advise them of their rights under the program, how to opt out, things of that nature. So when you figure that, with the 30 days brings us to February, probably won't know until, like I said, a week and a half from now in terms of where rates are going to be. The holiday season, we think that's going to give us enough time to make sure that the production of your first aggregation goes off without a hitch. And that's why we're recommending the March timeframe. That also helps us from a standpoint of not including a February in our first rate cycle. February tends to be a higher priced month, so we're starting in a March, which is a kinder month typically in the energy markets, and that's also going to help keep our prices suppressed versus where hopefully where the Eversource rate goes for our program.
So we were delegated we were delegated the responsibility to work this program through the process by the previous town manager and by the town council.
Yes.
Obviously, you know the situation with our town manager. We have a new interim town manager that started on Monday.
Today?
Today.
Today.
And so I know there had been a discussion I had with Stuart about having a power contract signed, and the town manager has the signature authority to do that.
Okay.
When do we need to present that to him to sign it?
So, again, we're going to, it's at least until after December 12th, right? Because we want to find out where those Eversource rates are. The markets are liquid and they move quite fast, right? So if we go for executable pricing with our bidders, our suppliers, we're going to have a signed contract. If we find prices that we want to take action upon, have a signed contract probably by 3 or 4 p.m. that same day. So we get you the prices in the morning, and then we need the town manager to act on those on whatever day we designate.
Not the 12th, but whatever day we designate.
Exactly. So we're going to have a number of rounds of indicative pricing. This is non-executable pricing before we get to that bid date. So it's not going to be simply like, I call you on the big red phone, emergency fire drill. We got to get this signed ASAP. We'll have a little bit more leeway or timing going into it. So we say, hey, geez, markets are looking favorable. Let's see if we can get all of our ducks in a row for next Wednesday. And so we make sure that the town manager is on call to execute the contract that day. We'll have the sample contract to the town manager and to the utilities committee for you to review. Now, this is a contract that we have written and we're providing to the suppliers, so it's a little bit less onerous than if we're using their document. It's something we've already taken a look at. But you have that in advance as well, so that the town solicitor, everybody else feels comfortable. All right, as long as the price is right, we're ready to go on that day that we've designated.
Okay.
So we'll get a contract with a blank line in it where some numbers will go.
Exactly.
And we
Numbers
can-
and a term.
We can do that now, I suppose, right? Look at that, or no?
Yeah, so we can. I'll have Stuart send you the sample contract for the committee to take a look at, and we can get that to you ASAP with plenty of lead times. That doesn't need to be dependent upon a week out from when we actually execute. So
Okay, so, because we'll have a certain lead time, but town legal counsel, I'm sure will have
yeah,
working in their own timeline. So I want to make sure that we get it in her hands so that she can do an adequate review.
As soon as possible would for that
Absolutely.
sample would be phenomenal.
Yep.
Yep.
So, oh, go ahead.
The numbers you're quoting, are those prior to or after deduction of your fee?
I believe those are inclusive of our fee.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, which is 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
1.5 %?
Yes. So if the price was base price was 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour, it'd be 9.65.
Sir.
So if we hear on the 12th, whatever sources proposed rates are going to be, when would you expect the analysis to be complete the next day, that this is what we're looking at, and then maybe a week down the road from that, we would be going out and executing a price contract?
Yeah, I mean, it entirely depends on the timing for the town and how the town manager feels. Obviously, just starting today, might need a little bit of being brought up to speed on it. But yeah, I think as soon as we have the Eversource number, we already have a few ideas in terms of which direction we would go. Again, our big concern is over collection from the previous cycle, and in which case, we come back with bad news if the rate was artificially suppressed to kind of hold off. So I just want to prepare the committee that is an option that we could recommend if that scenario plays itself out like it did last winter. So
aside from price, I mean, what's driving short-term versus long-term decisions?
so if I'm taking a look at the natural gas markets right now, which still makes up about 50% of our electricity generation here in the Northeast, gas prices are pretty suppressed. We had a little bit of a run up because there was some fear that there was some colder weather that was going to set in for the long term, but for whatever reason, we just don't seem to be able to sustain more than a week of cold weather at a time with these cold fronts, and it's dissipated. And so you've seen a sell-off commensurate with that in the natural gas market just in the last few days. So even the prices that we got last week to present are probably a little bit lower than what I'm quoting to you right now as a result of that. So if that trend continues, we're going to recommend, if there's enough space versus Eversource, a longer term contract potentially. And the reason for that is we just don't see a lot of catalysts to drive prices further downward, a lot of downward pressure. But there are still a lot of catalysts out in the marketplace that could not get us back to where things were in 2022, but certainly drive us maybe into the mid-teens in terms of pricing. I think, the incoming administration has talked a lot about returning electricity prices lower, and I just don't think they have a ton of levers to actually manifest that goal. I think when you take a look at the fact that natural gas has now become kind of a worldwide market for the United States. Prior to COVID and certainly the war in Ukraine, it was a domestic market that we had kind of all to ourselves up here in the Northeast with the New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania shale plays. Now we're sending that overseas because Europe has largely turned away from Russia as its main supplier. Russia was supplying about 43% of the natural gas to Europe, and they've since discontinued most of that service. Russia still supplies some, but now we kind of have one can of Coke that has multiple more straws in it than it did previously. So we're seeing this as kind of a baseline in the marketplace, and that's played itself out. If you take a look at the energy charts over the last 2 or 3 winters, when the sell-offs have taken place, when the winter has not materialized, we've kind of hit like a hard floor in terms of how low those commodity prices go, and we're still realizing that. And I know climate change obviously is an issue out there that people say, well, geez, climate change means warming, so can we expect continuous warming in our winters? And I think it is more so aligned with extremes. And so I think what we've seen the last few years is a situation in which the winter has not materialized, and we've had 35-degree average temperatures, very, very few heating degree days, historically speaking. When you don't have heating degree days, you don't have that competition for natural gas to heat your home versus natural gas to power your home. And so we've just had natural gas needed as an energy source. I think it's just a statistical probability that at some point in time we're going to have a flip-flop, even if for the short term, of a return to colder temperatures. And when we see that competing demand is going to butt heads in a very aggressive way, and we're going to see a return to prices that we saw, more in the 2022 time frame. And as you might recall, Eversource ran all the way up to 22 cents a kilowatt hour during that period of time. So I think, and Stuart thinks, that it's a good time to be looking at long term. That being said, we also are very cognizant of this is our first aggregation for Londonderry, and we have to deliver on the savings to the residents. So you might be in a situation where we're thinking the long-term numbers look really, really good, but in order to make sure that we're playing it safe and not getting a little too far ahead of our skis, we go with a shorter-term number to know that we can deliver on savings for the town of Londonderry. Because, 8 months from now, I don't know where Eversource is going to be, and there could be a couple different catalysts, that drive prices up or down. Again, though, we feel pretty strongly there's not much more southern movement for prices to find purchase on.
So just clarify for me, the 12th is when the Eversource submits their rates to the PUC, or is that when the PUC approves their rates?
That's when they submit their rates to the PUC.
And what would be the expectation that the PUC would say, no, they have to be lower than what you're asking for?
They don't typically get too involved in terms of pushback on the rates. I think because there'll likely be some stability with current rates versus what the next rate's going to be. I think the pushback would be minimal. Maybe from the Office of Consumer Advocate, sometimes they find a light item or two in there that they'll push back. But historically speaking, once Eversource releases, what their expected rate is going to be, there's not going to be a ton of pushback from the PUC unless you have extreme volatility in the rates, like we did in 2022 when there was a 100% increase in the cost of electricity from about 10 cents to 22 cents per kilowatt hour. Obviously, there were a lot of questions, a lot of pushback, but even in that scenario, Eversource was able to justify to the PUC why such an increase was necessary.
So it's a high probability then whatever Eversource goes in with is what it's going to be.
Correct.
Okay.
Worst case on the 12th, if Eversource financially or whatever comes back with a number that's not good to us, what's the next launch window?
So the next launch window would not be until about July, because that's when we get the rate information for the August cycle. So unfortunately, that's not the greatest news. But at the same time, our experience, and we've got 110 towns in our programs throughout New England. Is we really got to nail the first one, because if it's choppy or if there's not savings to be had, it kills the program in the cradle, and towns usually fold after that. So in terms of moving forward with this, but towns that make it successfully through the first iteration of the CCA program have something in the high 90 percentile of renewal longevity.
So an overcollection situation.
Exactly.
Prudence might suggest holding off.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you take a look at the markets, the rates right now are fantastic. If I had assurances that there would be no overcollection, I would advise doing something in the 9-cent range right now for a 20-month period. But because the overcollection potential exists, and I can't give a guarantee that wouldn't manifest itself, holding off for another week or so makes a lot of sense. And then if it does manifest itself and they have an artificially low price, even though people are saying, what the heck, we got our PUC approval in August of 2024 and now we're in June of 25, where's our program? I think in that case, still patience is the better avenue there, because for longevity of the program, it makes sense.
And on the 12th, they'll also, if there is an overcollection, they'll break it out right there in terms of what the overcollection is. So
Yeah,
everybody knows.
they'll announce if there are any factors like that. And I want to be clear that there is always some undercollection or overcollection. This was just the most pronounced that we'd ever seen in the history of these PUC rate cycles. And so it was kind of a carryover from how high prices had been in 2022. That market sold off in January of 23. Eversource got left with a bunch of cash that they did not need for risk premiums, and that's where that penny six of overcollection came from, and then materialized in the rates. So unlikely to happen again, but still could. So.
Good. So a few of us have a briefing with the new town manager next Tuesday to tell him where we're at with this program and get him ready to sign on the dotted line.
Yep.
And after that, we'll see where it goes.
Okay, excellent.
Because the 12th will be 2 days, the meeting's on the 10th.
Yeah,
So
so-
the 12th, we'll know where it goes, be fresh in everybody's mind.
Excellent. And I'll recirculate the indicative prices for you to send to the committee, and then I'll also get in touch with Stuart to make sure that you have a copy of the sample agreement to look over well in advance of any decision day. So
Perfect. Any questions for Bart before we move on? Great.
all right, great.
Thank you,
Nice to
Bart.
see everybody again.
Thank you. It's a long wait for a short talk, huh?
He was warned.
And it was useful for us, so thank you.
Moving on, administrative board work. Approval of minutes. Motion to approve the November minutes.
So moved.
Jeff, second by,
Second.
all in favor of approving the November minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Lynn sent in 2 corrections. One was spelling of a person's name. The other one, I keep on calling the dissent decree. It's a Freudian slip. It's actually consent decree, so.
What do you call
I
it?
go dissent.
Oh, dissent.
I'm not too happy with things right now, so.
So it was an editorial comment.
That's what it was.
So, discussions with staff. Kirsten?
Yes. So I did want to give an update based on the town council meeting last night. At the town council meeting last night, we had a couple of residents from Ross and Tokenall Drive stand up and ask what we were doing. The councilors did ask that we send a letter. We worked with legal to send a letter to the EPA.
We being the town.
We being the town, yes, to the EPA and New Hampshire DES, urging them to do everything they can to prioritize and move this forward as quickly as possible. The Director of Engineering, John Trottier, and I spoke today with Cheryl Sprague of the EPA and Renee Nalick of Department of Environmental Services, who is taking over for Andrew Fuller on the Tinkham site project. So we were able to get some substantive updates on the progress they were making and their timelines. Mr. Breslin had asked me to look into a couple of questions. One of them was, he asked me to reach out to DES and ask them what action that they believe should take place and what ability do they have to put pressure on the PRP's potentially responsible parties. And Renee did tell me that she does believe that the state is supportive of advancing the remedy that they're working on in terms of an interim, the water line as an interim type solution. There's obviously more work to be done beyond just that.
We're talking Tokenau now, right?
Ross and Tokenau, yes.
Okay.
Obviously, there's more areas that they're sampling and looking into. There's definitely some there's some more work to be done, but the state does believe that the solution that they're working towards, the remedy that they're working towards, is one that they support. The state is what is called a support agency on the Superfund site projects. On almost any project nationwide, Superfund, because they're federal projects, they would be considered a support agency. Not all of them, but most of them, and certainly on this one, where the PRP is kind of the project lead driver, and then the EPA is the lead investigator. So the state does take their cues from the EPA on this, and that was made pretty clear. Moving forward, we once again brought up the issue of increased communication with the residents on Ross and Tokenau, and we have a couple of potential solutions that we're looking at. The timeline that was in the letter that was sent to the residents of Ross and Tokenau, the letter was sent in June 2024. The steps in that letter remain the same, and they're similar to the ones that Ms. Smith and I received in communication from Aaron Shaheen, who's their community involvement coordinator. And while not able to commit to a hard and fast time frame, they are looking at being able to communicate about the potential remedies the beginning of next year, late January, possibly. And then which would be followed by a public meeting and then a public hearing. So that period they anticipate at this point in time, that period from January to March being one of heavy communication and activity. That said, there's a lot of things that can
This
change that.
January or next January?
The January 2025.
Okay, good.
Yes. That said, there's a lot of things that can potentially alter this timeline, which is why she was cautious to say that this is what she thinks is a realistic but not guaranteed goal. You know, as we're aware, there's going to be a political transition, which can impact leadership, size of the agency, and there's some, normal internal promotions, moves, retirements that are on this project as well. But she assured us that she is still she's been on this project for quite a long time. Her team is working extraordinarily hard to get to a point where they can release those remedies in January. So that is my update on the Superfund site and where that stands. And so the assistant town manager and legal are going to move forward on working on that letter with the town manager's approval and involvement.
Kirsten, what does it mean to release the remedy?
Release the report of the remedy. So their plan.
Oh, okay.
That's their plan moving forward with all the details. They have Cheryl also told me that they have been in consistent communication with Penachuk about the potential costs of this, which is promising for when they get to the point of releasing information, because in not all projects are you this far along in the potential design phase when you're ready to discuss the remedy phase. So their partnership and their ability to work well with Penachuk on this has been promising for the speed of execution and the amount of knowledge that they'll have when they do issue that letter of proposed remedies. So.
This is for Lynn. Okay, Krista. So on the water subcommittee, we had a meeting and we had, her name, I just remember her name, the lady that was there with her son. You were a guest and we had,
Mansfield.
and we mentioned something that they could do, and that was a TAR request. What's that form they can fill out?
Oh,
You
yeah,
guys had
it's
an
a-
acronym
it's
for it.
Technical
grant.
assistance grant.
Right.
Technical assistance grant review, RIFs.
It's a grant that the EPA has that can help homeowners,
Mitigate
individual
costs.
homeowners.
So,
So my question is, right,
yeah.
we were thinking, I mentioned the committee, it would be nice, because since that lady had the list of all the people on Ross Drive that are affected, that we get them to fill out that form and send it to the EPA to highlight the need, but now that this is coming forth, I don't wanna take and interfere with what's going on.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on what we should do?
So I don't think that they would interfere. I would caution delivering any communication to the residents on behalf of the EPA without directly running it by,
Right, there won't be any communication, it's
Yeah.
just that.
or
here's the
directing them to anything involving the EPA. I would highly caution us against that without communicating that through the EPA first. Did you say she brought this forward, the woman who lives on there?
During this
Yeah.
conversation.
Yep, she brought that
She kinda
forward.
runs the community meetings and all
Yep.
that kinda stuff.
So this did not come directly from the EPA?
No.
Okay, so without confirming, the amount of research and effort the residents there have put in is fabulous, and it's awe-inspiring, it really is. But
Right.
without directly communicating with the EPA about whether this is actually an eligible project, and if this is something they could do, we would not want them to do anything or put forward anything without really confirming that it would be a
Right,
system.
so we need to check to make sure that this is applicable.
Yeah, so if you can get me that information, I'll be happy to run it by Cheryl and Aaron and see what they have to say about it. But let's run that, I would suggest running that by
Good thing?
them first. I will also say, based on that, we want to be cautious with sending them to New Hampshire DES for the PFAS remediation grant. If there is a PRP, a potentially responsible party, and the guidelines for the grant, the newest administrator for the grant is Casey Moran up there. She's the contact person for the PFAS remediation grant now. It's no longer Amy Rousseau.
Right.
And we want to be careful because it does say that the guidelines do say that if you have been offered or accepted
That's what I was asking.
assistance,
Right.
you're no longer eligible for the grant. So we want to hesitate about telling people to go put in POET systems or do anything like that.
And anything that takes and has, say, St. Yeah, that
So-
company.
so in
I'm
this
saying,
area,
oh,
it's-
you guys already got money, we don't care anymore.
It's that, but it's also, we don't want to encourage people to go ahead and do this thinking that they're going to get the rebate program
Right.
without confirming their eligibility first, because then that means that, first of all, they could spend the money on the system and not get the rebate,
Right.
and that would be poor for them. And also that can interfere with the negotiations with the potentially
So
responsible
part of my
party.
thoughts on this was to get an aggregate of all the people in that area, how many people are affected, how much it's gonna cost, which is Penny Checkers doing anyways.
And that will, that information is going to be
Consolidated already?
substantively included in the potential remedies. And so again, this process, and because we're dealing with the federal government here, state is a little bit more nimble. It's a little more flexible, right? And I think Councilor Dunn knows
Absolutely.
this. But when you're dealing with the EPA, keep in mind they're dealing with projects on this scale across the entire country. And there's a level of standardization and there's a level of procedure that they do have to follow when they're going
So
through
my
these.
question is, I don't wanna rock the boat unnecessarily.
And again, Cheryl took almost an hour out of her day just right off the bat to talk to John and I about this today. So this is something that she is deeply committed to. And I know that sometimes the answer, that's the truth. The most honest answer is not the one that people want to hear in the moment. And I'm deeply empathetic to that these folks need and want water. And they deserve the water. And it's something that the EPA and DES are actively working towards, and they will have more information as outlined in that letter.
Okay.
And
Thank
so
you.
that's where it stands right now.
Kirsten, do you have any sense, say they release in January sometime, do the public meetings, et cetera, in terms of project start, project completion?
That we do not have that information yet, and that is information
idea.
that would come out through that process. I don't feel comfortable speaking to anything like that, and I don't have any of that information at this point in time. So it's just because this has been a frequent topic, these are the information that we were able to get. Like I said, there's a lot of transition, but I've been consistently impressed with the way that the teams have transitioned the information. You know, Renee is relatively recent to this project, but she hit the ground running on it, and she could answer all my questions today.
Thank you for what you did with that. Now, you mentioned that Andrew Fuller is no longer. Who is the person that is the contact with the town of Londonderry?
It's Renee Nalick. The person on this particular project is Renee Nalick. They have different engineers that are on different projects. And right now, as we're moving through this phase, we are definitely asking that, if possible, please route communication through John Trottier and myself to them. You know, we're all trying to work together and make sure everybody on this is on the same page. We're trying to make sure that we catch up our acting town manager as quickly as possible, that we're making sure we're conveying the information to the council as quickly as possible. So if you could please, like, when you have these questions, the fastest way to get them answered is going to be going through John Trottier and I. We're going to be able to move quickly and get those answers for you. You know, Ray, you came in last week and I said I'd have the answers today, and we got them. So if we can do that, it will really streamline communication. We'll make sure that the EPA, DES, and the town are all on the same boat, and that lets us update you all at the same time and keep everybody on the same page with the same amount of information. So,
Excuse me, you said that name rather fast. What is it again?
Renee Nalick. And I
Renee?
can write it down for you later, Ray.
Okay.
I have another question that's not on this project, but it's on the other project, on High Range. With the last meeting that we had here, we talked about, when the consent decree was originally, signed off on, that there were 350 homes that were sort of isolated out, as connecting to a power line, to a water line. I know that St. Cobain has not been very forthcoming in terms of,
So I just want to caution you, I just want to remind that when we're talking about negotiations with St. Cobain, they are ongoing. So we aren't going to comment publicly about those negotiations, other than to say that they keep coming back to the table. going to keep moving those conversations forward. Counselor Dunn, do you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely. I just say,
Okay.
please know that it's being worked on.
Okay, and,
We just don't want to discuss it openly and in any way impact the discussions.
okay.
So-
And particularly those 350.
So those 350 homes are within the consent decree area. That is, that saying that as it has been adjudicated and determined. And so that is part of the conversations that we're having with St. Cobain. And like I said, those conversations ongoing.
Okay. I
Yep.
understand that.
So
I just think that those
they have not
people
been
are
left out or
between a
forgotten,
rock
and
and a
again-
hard place, and that was, and that put them in a particularly difficult position.
Absolutely,
Correct.
and I don't disagree with that at all. And I think Councillor Dunn said this really well at the prior meetings when he talked about his own experiences, is that sometimes the honest answer isn't necessarily the most expedient, the one you want to hear. And I think what we're trying to do is give that information, the most accurate information, as clearly, directly, and transparently as we can. And not promise things that we can't deliver on a certain time frame. And I think we're trying to consistently do that, and so. I'm running out of voice.
Anything else?
It would be useful, hopefully I'm not violating your guidance here, to at least find a way to communicate to those 350 people that we are working on the problem, so that they know somebody cares.
Yes. I have a couple of ideas in the works on that I have been working with the prior town manager on, that I plan to continue working with the current town manager on how to best conduct those notifications, communications.
Great, thanks.
So,
Anything else?
not unless you need anything else from me?
No.
All right.
Master plan update? Martha, anything to report on?
Well, there's only a tiny little bit to report on because our meeting is coming up this Thursday. So we have gotten the final results of the survey that went out, and we've started discussing ways to reach out to the community with some of the results that we found. One of which is to talk to the farmers in town, because that seemed to be an overall overriding interest of the people generally who responded to the survey, that they like the farms, they want the farms to keep going, so reaching out to them. We also talked about possibly reaching out to residents to have them sort of submit photos of the type of housing that they think would be acceptable in our town, that they'd like to see in town. We talked about possibly sometime after the holidays, having a public Zoom session. I don't know exactly how it would work, but we would work out the details of that. And the housing needs for older adults, and how to involve the schools and students, and what their thoughts are. And we hope to wrap up this chapter for the master plan dealing with land use. And how quickly that will be done, I really can't say.
What was the, Martha, what was the demographics of those who responded? Did it skew towards, one?
I would say that it skewed more toward residents who had lived here lived in Londonderry for a long time, own their own home. But, there definitely was a variation. And certain questions we looked at skewed different ways as well.
But I think overall, the reaction to the people that ran the survey was that the proportions were in line with what they've seen in other towns. And they were actually, I think, surprised by the number of respondents we had.
That's correct.
And you know, and I think attributed to some of the activities of the master plan team, so.
A lot of work to be done, but I think we have a good
Yeah.
baseline to start from at this point in time. Good. Thank you. Subcommittee discussions. Moving on to those, energy, community choice, power aggregation. I think we have an update from Bart, so we're good on that. Potential solar energy projects, anything to report on from MHT? Nothing new on that.
In committee.
Yep. Energy audits, Mike, anything to talk about there?
Let me ask Paul to update us on that.
Yeah, I reached out to Eversource to try to get a sense of where their, energy saving projects have come from, and it's undergoing some changes as described to me. So, I asked, when will the changes be available, and I didn't get a definitive deadline or anything like that. You heard tonight, there's some, apparently concerns. I mean, all electric customers are paying for these programs. And so there's a lot of questions about why is everybody paying for these programs? And the cost effectiveness and all of that. So, I would say, stay tuned. And, I'm gonna they said they would get back to me in a few weeks, so we see what they say.
I would suggest them, if they said a few weeks, by our next monthly meeting, assuming it's reasonably.
January 7th.
Okay. That we take a decision whether to just start investigating something that we contract on our own. And, I mean, if we could get a freebie, that's great, but if we can't, we can't stop the train.
Gotta keep moving forward
Yeah.
somehow, right?
Right.
Nope, I agree with that.
Plenty of companies that do that. Plenty of companies that do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. While I'm talking energy, I might as well give you my non-update on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant. I went, you might recall, I went back to them at one point and said, when are we gonna get the technical advisor to lead us through our developing our energy strategy? And they told me, end of the year. And so it was approaching the end of the year, so I wrote the same people back again and said, well, what's the new forecast? I haven't even gotten an answer. And, I fear that the change of administrations might be costly to our effort here. So I don't know really what to do other than just stand by.
I think that's probably all we can do. Yeah. Okay, thank you for doing that. Water, Jeff, anything?
Had a nice meeting 2 weeks ago on Saturday. The people from the Tinkham site that it sounded like Kirsten had a really productive week on, came in and had a great conversation on the deck that everybody has in their hands. Just a couple points about what they discussed, their concerns. Very professionally presented themselves, and I think we had a really nice back and forth with them. Obviously, we're not the people that decide, and it sounds like Kirsten is all over this at this point, which is great. So the to-dos for us, I think, are de minimis at this point, unless Kirsten needs something from us. But I'm really pleased that the recommendation to talk to the town and bring people and make your voices heard was effective. And I'm not surprised that when the concern was brought up strongly, that people are jumping. So, pretty good outcome. And that graphic is just, Ray asked a good question. That graphic is just from the EPA Community Involvement Plan. Just copy pasted it from their document that is on their website. So, that is not my creation.
My apologies, y'all, for the computer issues. It's having some issues connecting to the server today, so.
The draft, that's from the immediate concerns. The draft discussion, that's John's list of the projects that Pennachuck is working on. These are an ongoing list. It gets updated monthly-ish.
Yeah, they're a little late there. They were kind
That's
of
fine,
busy
yeah.
last week, so.
Yeah. So that's being maintained. We're-
Actually, I'll correct. They actually sent me a very detailed list of the water tank with all the milestones and stuff. So that's pretty well laid out, which I didn't need, but on the flip side, I'm still asking for updates on the other ones.
Sure.
Okay.
So this, we'll probably have an update in January.
Yep.
But this is something that, you know, the questions were asked on what's going on, and this is something we can make available. Maybe put this on the website, but that's a conversation for another day.
Well,
Maybe.
Kristen's working on, we didn't have time to connect this
Yeah,
month.
you and I, at some point, if you can send, John, if you'd like to send me times that
I'll
work for
come
you.
over and I'll meet with you if you got time to decide what we want to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this week's a little
Yeah, I thought it would be.
busy, but let me know, and I'd love to sit down and because like I said last time, I have some ideas on how to best put it there.
Right.
That'll allow for the most dynamic updating, so.
Right, because dynamic updating works, plus she has the ability maybe to put it in PDF format, so it goes on the web and all that kind of good stuff.
Yep. So getting some good feedback on this. Hopefully it's something that's useful for the community in addition to just us, not just us, but in addition to us. On the community outreach, we're working on the PFAS, Ann and Mindy Messner report. Also, I mentioned it last week, or last month, really looking for people that want to take the lead on putting together a report or a discussion or the format we used was an interview, sort of a structured interview to make it a dialogue instead of just one person up there talking.
And he wants to do it on different subjects, not just water. Whatever
Right.
your choice is, to do a short video clip to get more and more clips out there, sorry.
Right, yeah, and it's on the thing. We've got, half a dozen or so. I remember you mentioned the recycling. You were really strong in the recycling and maybe composting.
Compost, sure.
Anything at all related to utilities, I think it's, part of what we can do is the outreach. And I know people here, some people have really passionate views on different parts of it. And it's, it's kind of a fun little process, and it gets us a small win as a committee. And it's something that we can do as an outreach for the system. Anybody that has something on this list or anything related to infrastructure, just let me know, and we'll pull together a team and, come up with a script and have a conversation, and maybe bring Kirsten or the town manager or the town engineer to sort of interview them and do sort of a Johnny Carson / Joe Rogan presentation. I'm saying an interview. I'm saying like an interview.
Sorry.
Or else we'll say a TED Talk on these topics.
There you go.
Ted Londonderry on these
What did I
topics.
sign up for by sitting in
What
this
we
seat?
did for the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry, my nephew was in town this last weekend, so.
So
Letterman. Let's
you
go
would be
for
playing
Letterman.
the role of Joe, is that the deal?
Or Johnny. Yeah, I would, the way we did it last time is we had some questions that were structured, and the interviewee had them beforehand so they knew what we were gonna ask. It's not a gotcha conversation, it's, the person would have something they wanna say, and it's like, oh, great, we're gonna be a sounding board to get the message out. And then there's some back and forth and discussion, so it's kind of fun. It's a good way to get the community out. So
What time length is it? Are they like 15 minutes?
15 to 30 minutes.
Okay.
Usually the way we did
30
it the
minutes is
first
good.
time was for the water line extension, and we had Mr. Malaguti in, and I think it was 30 minutes of
So you asked the
interview.
questions, I forgot to put the teleprompter info up there, so I was trying to read as fast as I could without putting my head down.
Yeah.
So you can use a teleprompter, and then when it came to some, the questions when Mike was presenting, I had keyed on him to ask the public question, but we already rehearsed that.
Yeah. So it works really well. So if if you have something that you're interested in, like the recycling or the composting, just send us an email and we can go back and forth and sort of, this is what we found on the first one. And like I said, it's a good way to get the community out. People watch more than they read these days, I think. And, it can be a very, if it becomes a value-added resource from the community, then people will start watching it and they'll look for them. All right, so I've covered that, and also seeking content for Facebook. I mean, this is a little bit outside of water, but also seeking content for Facebook. In the short term on water, we have the discussions on the water main extension. We had that last month. This is just continuing the information sharing with everybody. and we're continuing our work on the master plan. I have a little bit of work to do with my team on collecting the data and putting together, I called it a data lake previously, which is just a file with all the data that we have, so we can sort of sit with it and read it and understand what is available before we start asking questions, well, as we're asking questions. So we're working on that as a team and trying to put some structure around the to-dos, which we'll get better at. And then going to the long term, we have on the last page, Kirsten, and if everyone looks on their last page, this right here, this map is from Pennachuck. And the triangles, you have more zoomed in maps in your packets. The triangles are wells that have at one time tested greater than 4 parts per trillion. This does not show the poets, and it does not show, some of these tests could be a little old. So all of these places, if you look, we talked about the clusters. You know, we have clusters of areas. You know, obviously it's all over town, but we have clusters that may be easier to get done first. You know, here we have a line going in, so we could maybe put a line to here, and maybe to here, maybe to here, and this is something they highlighted in our conversation. You know, the Kings has a lot of issues, it looks like it has a lot of issues. You know, there's a lot of places in the consent decree, some places up north of the Kings, up in here. So there's different buckets of areas that may be easier to capture. It's, you know, if you run a line to here, there's a lot of homes in here. So we were very clear when we were at Pennachuck that we're looking for an engineering analysis. The relationship with St. Gobain on how that conversation is going is not what we're there to talk about. And the politics of who gets what first is not what we're there to talk about. We're just, you know, how much does it cost and what is the most houses that you can get for the
Bang
least
for buck
dollars.
we're looking for.
Yeah.
Bang for buck and people with contamination.
Yep.
Yeah.
The discussions of the politics will be the politicians. That's not what we're here to here to discuss. So there was a question on the maps. I think this is a really nice piece of data. And I provided the maps to everybody. So we're getting good data. Our next meeting is in February, third week in February, third or fourth week in February. And they're putting some horsepower into an analysis on a way to build out in a cost-effective manner. Lots of discussions happen after that, but that at least gives us something, a stick in the ground to start talking to people. So the update on this is we're working on it. They've given us some more data, and we'll have a meeting in February. We'll have more data or more feedback in February. So.
The other thing was they do have other maps we'd like to make available to the whole committee, of where the pipelines are, how they're connected, which ones are contained facilities, for example. So we'd like to have them highlight that, so we can see where some of these water mains are, and gee, if we put one here, but there's one over here, how much is it connected to complete the loop and things like that.
Right.
Right.
So we're getting some good data. We're getting smarter about working with Pennachuck. They're very responsive. When I first started working with them, it would be a week till I got back, and you know, I asked for these maps Monday, I think, or last week maybe, and they're within 24 hours I had them. So we're getting much more closer relationship with them, which is I think great. So I think that's it.
Great.
Any questions or?
What were the blue circles? Did I miss that?
The blue circles, I have that in my email. If you give me a few minutes while I'll look it up and I'll tell you. It's a well with, there's something there I'll tell you in a few minutes.
I can add a little bit of good news on the waterfront, but no pun intended. Last night, the town council voted to accept a contribution of a small 1/3 acre plot of land at the intersection of Parmenter and 102. And it's just a wetland. The lady that owns it is just willing to give it to the town. But it is another link in the chain of protection that on Nessun-Cake Brook. The brook goes right through it. So it's, you know, a small piece, but still another way of getting ourselves clean water, keeping it clean.
Great.
That's great.
Okay, sewer solid waste, John, any update?
Talk about a couple things. Household hazardous waste day. I don't have any data on the other side of the tracks where they were collecting all the hazardous chemicals from folks, but Lynn and I and the other two members of our household, of our waste oil collection team, got somewhere near 300 gallons worth of waste oil on that date, which is more than I've ever seen on a single date.
It's crazy.
So that was impressive. And I'm going to take a minute just to throw an advert out to anybody who's watching delayed tape or whatever. But it came to our attention as we looked at each other that the average age of our group is about 70. So if you know any young bodies, we're certainly welcome them into the fray. The work isn't that hard, obviously. But that was, I think, even despite the weather on that Saturday, that was a successful collection for us.
Absolutely.
I think that was good. Also, in the past month, Ray and I, plus Kirsten and Bob Carey, the town's environmental engineer, toured Waste Management's maintenance recovery facility down in Billerica. And it was very interesting because it became very obvious that they've done a lot of upgrading in this facility in the last year. It's a huge facility. It's the old Boston Globe printing plant down there that they've converted over. And despite the size of the whole place, the parking lot seemed relatively empty when we got there. And I think the primary reason was they've rolled in so much technology now that they're down to about 20 employees in the entire facility. So it's very interesting to see the contrast of all this, let's be honest with it, trash-like stuff coming in the door, and then all the technology, optical scanners that were used to sort cans from bottles, from cardboard, et cetera. So it was amazing. Very difficult environment for human beings to work in that it was incredibly loud. And as Ray indicated to me earlier, it's a breathing experience that neither one of us will forget in the near future. So it was good. And in terms of what did I personally take, and Ray can comment, but there were two things. One is we'll have a short-term benefit in that Kirsten, who was with us, is going to contribute something into the lantern. I think, Kirsten, speaking for you, with the seasonal bent before the Christmas holiday somewhere, she's looking at me thinking about that town manager she has to train.
Hey, I don't have to train anybody. I'm not in charge of anything. Yes, no, we're going to work on it at least,
Yes.
even if it's not in an issue with the Lantern, independently distributed.
And what's the headline on that? I think
I do believe it's "Don't recycle your reindeer."
Oh my God, how innovative! I don't know who came up with that.
Don't recycle your what?
Reindeer.
They told us a story about some of the horror shows they have that people put dead animals in their recycle bin, and they actually had a fully I don't know what do they call it when a hunter takes down a deer and
Carcass.
a fully dressed deer carcass in the recycle bin, and there were other things, and we talked a little bit about what jams up the lines, and obviously that does it, or they talked about
Plastic bags.
the plastic bags is the classic, but
I'll find out what those are.
the plant manager who did the tour was standing on the line and watched a whole pizza come down the line, down the recycle line. So he said,
You did not.
I did not eat it.
All right.
I left it alone. I left it alone. I was hungry, but I left it alone. And besides that, there's an educational component, and Ray and I had talked a little bit earlier about, I think, maybe one of the objectives of the relatively dormant Sewer and Solid Waste Committee will be kind of getting some of that recycling education stuff going. I mean, every time I talk to somebody in that business, I learn something. For example, I learned I'm not supposed to have been putting my wax-covered milk cartons in my recycle bin.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know it either. And I've been doing this for a number of years, but those wax containers can't go in with your cardboard recycling. They go in your trash.
Do you think I'm sorry, can I have a question? Do you think the recycling guy would be open to doing an interview on the town?
Not sure this would have been the right fellow. This was a plant manager,
Oh, no.
a little dry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, but somebody with some color, we could probably pull somebody in. But there's a lot of stuff like that we can talk about. So I think, Ray, speaking for you, worthwhile trip.
Yeah, and you might mention no bicycles and no barbells
Yes.
in recycle.
Yes.
Okay. The people, particularly in apartments, they're getting out of the apartment, everything, put it in the recycle, should go in the trash.
Do they have a solution for the black plastic yet? You know what I'm talking about, the ones that come from, no.
No, we didn't address it, so I don't know what's out there. They did tell me, though, not to put guns in the recycling bin. That kind of messes things up, too.
Ammunition?
Ammunition's fine?
Yeah, ammunition.
I was afraid to ask if the mob had left anybody in there and maybe put them through the process.
Or you're not supposed to put aerosol cans, because in a lot of them,
Oh, yeah.
they'll catch on fire, Catch the dumpsters on fire.
There is, Lynn found a waste oil grant. I got permission from our environmental engineer that I'll fill out the grant. It's about $2,500 to work on our little waste recovery building behind the fire station there. We have several issues, the first of which it's X number of years old now and it needs to be cleaned and spruced up. But beyond that, there's a dam there in case the tanks in there ever leaked, keep the oil from spilling into the parking lot. And particularly on us guys that average over 70, stepping over that with a couple of gallons of waste oil in your hand can be a life-changing situation. So we're talking about maybe a ramp or something there, and this little $2,500 grant would be about the right size for that. And I did find out it's a rolling grant. It continues, so.
What do we do with the waste oil when we're done with it?
The waste oil gets burned over at the town garage to heat the town garage. So they have a specific furnace that uses the waste oil.
Okay.
That's it.
Great.
John, did you know anything about the New Hampshire law that was passed that starting in February, institutions that produce, I thought it was 1,000 pounds, but I'm not really sure of the facts. But from what I understand, this law was passed and it applies to at a certain threshold, which I thought was 1,000 pounds a day. So if your grocery store or your school cafeteria or your whatever is producing this threshold up to above this threshold in food waste, you are now obligated to compost it or work with a composting facility. Am I the only one that saw this? Or?
I haven't heard of that.
I have not aware of it in New Hampshire, but there was an article in today's Boston Globe about that same program in Massachusetts that exists. And there were some initial bumps in the road when that program rolled out, but right now Massachusetts food waste program is considered to be one of the most successful in the country, and it's got the same kind of an angle. I'm not sure about 1,000 pounds, but I think it's 1,000 pounds over a period of time, like a week or every 2
Maybe it
weeks or
is,
something like that. But they have private contractors for the most part that restaurants and institutional food service people are required to contract with to haul that material out. And I'll circulate the article if folks are interested that's in today's Globe. And I'll follow up, Mike, on the New Hampshire.
Yeah, because if it applies to folks in the London area, then, we may be able to facilitate them knowing about it and figuring out how to comply with it.
Yeah, by the way, there are at least two companies that pick up in Londonderry, that pick up food, not food, but cooking oil from restaurants and others. And so, and what do they do with it? I actually talked to one of the drivers. I said, is it a New Hampshire company? He didn't really answer that, but I said, well, where do you take it when it leaves here? They take it to Berwick, Maine, to the, to the wastewater treatment plant there. And they don't, now, keep in mind, they pick up more than just cooking oil. They also pick up, I believe, some kind of water product. So the oil goes to the top, okay? Now, going through a truck, it mixes around anyway, so I'm not sure. But he said they go to Berwick, Maine, they offload some of it there. I believe he said a wastewater treatment plant. And then they go to, back to New Hampshire, to, a small town, I want to say Epsom, New Hampshire. And they offload some of it there. And that company turns it into an energy product, fuel. So, and that's,
French fry burners.
that's, you know, when we're talking about energy, right, and we're talking about waste and, and recycle, that's a recycling of that product. And some of it actually is used for energy. So that's not all bad. Some of that's good.
John, any news on cable TV or?
Yeah, Kristen, I sent you mail, could you pop that up for me? So on a journey, it's been a little tedious. The question was, how do we take and get, information so people know easily if different offerings available in their area? And the one we talked about was Fidium.
Yep.
So what I've done is I put together, and we have to walk a fine line about, posting, if we want to, what's available versus making sure we're not advertising for somebody. So, South Five got, just to let you know, right to the bottom, that's good, Chris, go right to the bottom. So believe it or not, Fidium is one of the more active ones, and they're doing what they call an overbuild. An overbuild is a true cable, optical cable, not using the Xfinity services that are available. So what you have now is the ability for other cable companies, scroll up a little bit, please, thank you. For example, right there, AT&T, CenturyLink, Cox, Earthlink, all of those, what they use is, and DirecTV, of course, at AT&T, they use the existing Xfinity cable to stream their services with their box and things like that. That doesn't offer too much for people. What does offer more is Dish, of course T-Mobile, which is a phone company, and that's limited to, they say 5 gig, but it's never going to happen. That's not an editorial, it's an engineering fact. But scroll up, all the way to the top, thank you. So what I've done is, I'm thinking, when I finish this, we can publish, if people want to take and get information, this is Comcast. This is their main web pages. How you check for availability, how you get the offerings and plans, how you get customer support, how you get the channel lineup. And this is just an information source for people without getting into saying this one's better than somebody else or whatever. And it goes through. DirecTV is interesting. DirecTV has cut a deal with Xfinity, and they also with AT&T, where you can get DirecTV now through your Xfinity cable. Okay, Fidium is on their own. They're trying to underprice the whole 9 yards. So my thoughts is, I think I should finish this. You guys can take a review of it. I can send out what I have for now, and then maybe the possibility of just us posting this for an informational source for people in the town. However, I'm hoping to meet with the Northeast, the New Hampshire, Vermont, Northeast guy who runs Fidium. It's been very hard to reach this guy. I had to go through like 3 or 4 people to have us explain to me what their plans are, what their rollout's going to be, because they're trying to get as aggressive as they can. They're trying to replicate what Xfinity did in the 80s and 90s, basically, or Comcast at the time. There's something else I wanted to say. Oh, I can say this. So when cable first came out, there's only one speed. It operates at one speed. what they do is they throttle down and they sell different services. It's just not Xfinity, Comcast. It's nationwide, okay? Now, what happens is, if you're a casual user, it's okay. If you want a little more, if you want to start doing streaming, you might want to buy the next one level above. Most have 3, some have 4 and 5 levels. However, they've slowed it down so much that the heavy users, businesses, and gamers, remember, gamers is a big part of their business, have to buy the fastest one, which used to be the basic service at a flat rate. And that's where I think the FCC let things get out of control. That's my personal opinion, but that's what's happening. So as far as in town, I talked to the network engineer, we're still having problems with Xfinity service. I'm pretty sure, my technical expertise, it's because they're mixing fiber and stranded regular cable. They're trying to upgrade their trunk lines to get as much speed as they can, but the routers, servers, you can think of them as servers, for each of the streets and individual roads off a main pole, they have to be cable. And that's where they start getting problems. Incompatibility for what they call block server requests. And you do a fast forward, it jumps like, do a 1, you get 10 blocks. Do a 2, you get 20 blocks. Do a 3, you keep on pressing the button, all those are commands, and it gets them confused. And then it says, please check your cable.
Oh, no.
So, any thoughts? If you want, I'll send what I have out now. I've still got more work to do. I was given a thing from the network engineers from Comcast, so I can run a cable check. And it's pretty heavy duty, and it failed again. So once it fails, they get a notice in the office, and I'll get a call tomorrow, which is good. I mean, they want to know what's going on. So it's pretty tough.
That's good.
Try to make it short. So I will send it out to everybody, and then you can do what you want with it. But I got more to do research on. And the big one I want is to meet with the Fidium guys, because that's probably the best opportunity, the way the town is growing, and they're just like water. Bang for the buck.
Yep.
Right? There's an apartment, I want to go in.
Is it worth including SpaceX in this, or is it worth including SpaceX in this as an internet provider?
SpaceX, I don't know.
Or Starlink, sorry.
Oh, Starlink. I haven't got to it yet, but yes.
I would just ask, excuse me, Mr. Chair and committee, if before we post anything like this, please give us the opportunity to run this through.
Well,
Of course.
yeah,
I'm
through
only
legal.
going to, as I said,
Thank
I
Through
wanna-
legal,
I
yes,
want to
thank you.
share it with
That
everybody
was exactly my
to
thought.
review, and then, of
Yep.
course, we do the normal thing before we post. We have to go
Thank you.
through you, the gatekeeper.
Hardly. I'm a very good emailer is what I am. But yeah, no, I would like to make sure that before we post anything like this, it gets to council and legal first.
Nothing
please. Thank you.
confidential there. It's all, it's just a matter of hot links resources, that's all.
No, but sometimes the order by which things are presented or whatever
Yeah.
creates issues, so.
Alphabetical. You're right. Again.
Yeah.
my
We'll do
intention-
that. Obviously, it'll go through.
Right, obviously,
Yeah.
always.
Nothing,
Leave
yeah.
it to those who know better.
We don't have the keys to post anything anyway without going through Kirsten, so,
It's true. I keep them closely guarded.
yes. And I don't want them.
That's all I have, thank you.
One question, John?
Yeah.
So this is basically, the 3 companies you have up there are the ones that are currently capable of providing internet, cable TV, or TV, and phone, landlines, or I would assume.
Well, it's more than 3, but there's a lot more than that. I just use those because they cover a majority of the state. But of course, AT&T and Verizon now, with their 5G service, they are a true internet provider, believe it or not.
Available in London.
Available anywhere.
Okay, I guess what I'm wondering is, if I look at, for example, some of the social media, I constantly see folks in there saying, I want to cut the cable, and et cetera, et cetera. And would it make sense, as part of this comparison, to include some of those options for folks, like a Hulu or any of those kinds of guys?
There's actually a link in there that lists every available service in New Hampshire. There's almost 50 of them.
Yeah,
Okay, you're right, yes. I don't know how far I want to get into that. It takes a while to research each one of those. But I do have a link to all the available, and it's put up by the government, all the available services for internet in the town. Okay, so.
Good.
Okay.
Great, thank you. With that, moving on to roundtable. Joy?
Yeah, I just want a quick comment. And this piggybacks on what Mike was asking when we were talking, when Josh gave us the presentation. As we're moving forward, thinking about our master plan for focusing on energy for Londonderry, I just kind of want to shift things a little bit. When we talk about economic costs and cost savings for present day, I think this was what you were getting at, Mike. Those cost savings to us may be costs to future generations, or even, costs 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And I think that we're seeing that now. We are paying the costs for savings that were incurred decades ago when we had the chance to start to switch to renewables. And when we started to understand what carbon dioxide was doing to our ecosystems, to the place that we as humans live and need as a healthy Earth ecosystem. And so I think that when we're talking about those cost savings, we really need to take into consideration the costs that will be borne out by these, and what it says in here, climate change related to greenhouse gases is a real escalating issue with significant impacts. And those impacts have real economic costs associated with them. So I think we really need to think about that as a committee.
Great. Paul?
I'm good.
John?
I think I want to kind of stand in support of what my partner over on the right here said and what Mike said earlier. The one thing that kept hitting me throughout Josh's presentation was everything seemed to be based on finance, present-day finance. And I think as someone that has maybe experienced some bad results in their lives and the lives of folks near to them because of maybe too much emphasis on that and not enough forward thinking on some of these issues. I was a little concerned, but I stood mute for probably the only time in my life because Mike asked the right question. All right, so I would reiterate that I'd like to see us, when we do work on this, to maybe incorporate and not come across so much as he didn't all but say it, but he certainly left an impression with me that the approach of New Hampshire to solar wind, for example, is we're not interested in that particularly unless we can balance the books on it. And I just think there's more to that kind of thing than balancing the books.
Good.
Enough.
John?
Two quickies. Kristen, Art is the interim person, and Mike had a real focus, working with this committee. I don't know how to ask this. Maybe you should ask him, how much does he want to be involved? I mean, is he gonna come to our meetings? Is he gonna let you handle everything, just so we know what to copy him on or whatever? If it's, you don't have to have an answer now, but I'm sure you're gonna be.
Certainly on my radar for conversation. It's day one, so we're gonna let Artie's in and catch up on all the different things. He's working with department heads, he's working with the staff, jumped right in. So I will certainly update you when I have more information.
Thank
But
you.
as for right now, continue communicating with Councilor Dunn and with myself the way you have been, and I think we'll be in great shape.
All right, good. Second thing is, speaking of effect, seaweed pellets for cows reduces methane gas by 50% instead of regular grain. How's that?
Martha, anything?
I was just gonna mention one thing that I gotta,
Want me to come back?
yes, please.
Mike?
I'll pass with thanks to my colleagues for supporting my efforts to be a little more reasonable about what it means to be cost effective.
No comment.
Ray?
I'm all set.
Ron?
I'll just add to what Joy, John, and Mike were concerned about. The way to change this policy is to come to the committee meetings. That's the way it happens.
There you go.
Honest to God, when you come in person, we listen to you.
Yeah.
You can put online testimony in. I read it. Other people read it. Doesn't have the same impact as in person. When somebody sees you right there in person testifying, something has a major impact on the committee.
So you mean the Tuesday morning, water committee meetings?
No, I mean like come to the state committee meetings. Like typically, the energy committee meets on a Monday. It may change, depending on who the chair is and that stuff. But in the past, it was on a Monday. When the bills come up, and you see the bills come, and they have come and testify against these things, because that's what he was saying is, right now he's being directed by the state legislator to do these things.
Right.
You guys can have an impact on that by coming to the meetings and talking to the committee, and then the committee basically votes, and then it comes to the legislature, and we vote, okay?
Okay.
The committee is where kind of all the things happen.
Right.
That's where all the
That's where
super
everything
nuts is
happens.
all made, okay?
Yeah.
And then we bring it to the legislature. So I'm just saying, come to the energy committee meetings if you want to change energy policy. You know, come to resources, recreation, development if you want to change any water policies, you know, or PFAS issues. Anything that this committee wants to do, I can direct you to the committee and I can direct you where to go and the times, but that's where you're going to have the most influence on the state level.
And we can find it all online.
It's all online too, yeah, it's all online, yep.
And by the way, I didn't want to speak, but I changed my mind.
Too late. Too late, Martha.
I love it.
Well, mine won't take long, Ray. I'm gonna,
We'll come back, Ray.
As they say at NCIS,
love it.
Rule 13.
I wanted to
Point
say
of order.
for, all of you that are interested in the solid waste stuff, there's an unbelievable show on Netflix that's running right now that's called Buy Now, The Shopping Conspiracy.
Oh.
So if you have Netflix, go watch this. And I mean, it's very depressing, but it is knowledge we should all have.
Great. Ray, you get the last word.
Okay. Speaking about coming to meetings, if anybody is interested in the groundwater trust fund meetings, they're on the second Monday of each month. Now, that can change, but the 13th, the 10th, the 14th, you know, I'm reading months, you know, and so you can go. You don't have to participate, you don't have to speak, but you can learn. And it's very important. We were talking about a representative going, like perhaps Ron, if you could, but he's very busy. But we really should have a representative from the town of Londonderry as part of that, I think. I mean, Deb Paul was at one time until she got asked to leave. I don't know.
Well, I asked the chair of that committee one day what the criteria was from somebody from a town being on.
Yeah.
And he said that you have to be a town councilor.
That's why we suggested Ron.
Yeah.
That's right.
But he's busy.
I agree.
No,
I agree. Ron would be great.
Right
but-
now, there's not an opening.
Let me talk to him. We'll get it out. We can fix
Ray, I would do it.
Okay,
I would make the
so,
time available, Ray.
So moving on, public comment, we have no public comment at the end of the meeting. The next meeting is Tuesday, January 7th, be the first Tuesday in January, 7 o'clock here. So hopefully we'll see everybody there. And with that, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to return.
Have a second? Second by Jeff. All in favor of adjournment? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.